your dreams becomes harder to chase. The words won't come, you don't know what to say. When we come together, the storms we can weather. Don't let go of me, we'll get through this, you'll see. Like pictures from the past, we were meant to last. There's nothing we can't do when we come together. United we stand, divided we fall. This is the battle cry that unites us all. Come with me, let's show what we can do. We can't do it without you.
Hey guys, welcome in, welcome to Conversations with Christy. I am so glad that you're here. I've got the amazing Karina with us this afternoon. We are going to talk all things math when it comes to astrology. But before we get to that, I want to apologize because this morning I hopped off super fast. I got 2 phone calls back to back from somebody that never calls me, and it was a family member, and I was afraid that something had happened. Everything is okay. It ended up being a completely different situation, but I wanted to just say thank you guys so much for understanding that. And just because it was Karina, it was like, I'm like, everything's fine, I gotta go, bye. It just went plunk.
It can be scary, especially when you get phone calls at a time you're not expecting or someone never
Yes.
calls you. It can be scary.
Right. And that's what it was. And then, I was first words I remember, is everything okay? Oh yeah, I just wanted to talk to you. I'm like, but I didn't really want to talk to you, but okay, here I am.
There you
So
are.
here I am. All right. And then, Karina, I didn't even get a chance to tell you any of this. So you are hearing some of this for the first time. Now, some people on the channel have already heard this, but Truth Energy Wave Meditation. We are going over to his channel, to Victor's channel, on Friday evening at 9 p.m. And I am inviting people to come and be on screen and hold an energetic node for his meditation. So you are invited if you are able to come. I would love to have you on. If you cannot, that's cool. And I'm not putting you on the spot at all. I'm just telling you because I will forget. So yes, and since Victor, I see you popping up, I talked to Amber Ascends. You guys all know Amber on the channel. And she unfortunately is not going to be able to make it. But what I wanted to share with you, Victor, is that she caught your live meditation this morning, and she said she needed that so much. She's like, it affected me in such a profound way. She's like, I really, really needed that. And she was so thankful. She's like, it's a synchronicity. She's like, you just show up, she's like, so I got this meditation and then you reached out, and she's like, I just needed it today. So I wanted to, Victor, tell you that she was there this morning. I don't know if she said hi or not, but she was in there and she was just so thankful. So guys, we're going to be doing this on Friday. He does the meditations at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Central. So check him out. Even if you're not going to be on the screen holding an energetic node with us, you can be in the chat and still hold an energetic node. We just want to share the love and everything in the community, help everybody grow, help everybody to just be a part of that. And we were kind of talking the other day on his channel where he is he works in the collective energies, and he's sending all of that vibration and the energies and everything up to everybody else, whereas what we're doing here on this channel, Karina and I, we're helping you work through what you're going through so that we can raise that vibration. So we're all doing the same thing, it just looks a little different, but there's room for all of us, there's room for abundance for all of us. And so I want to encourage you guys, if you can, on Friday to come. But anyway, I think that's it. I wanted to say those things before I forgot, and before anybody got too concerned that that something drastic happened this morning. Because I've never been so short. I'm like, gotta go.
So glad everything is good. For real.
Yes. All right.
Right.
So this
Am I
is
ready to kick it off?
You are. It is all you guys. Like I joke around. I'm like, I can't even add 6 plus 3 without using my fingers. So we're gonna see how this goes.
Yeah, I think I'm so excited to do this. This is a little bit of an experiment. As I started preparing for this episode, and you know, astrology and astronomy were very interwoven, during the Hellenistic era, back around a few hundred years BCE, and then later. And the idea was that the math and science were studied in order to be able to do the astrology. So there was this inherent belief that the things that happened up there meant something. And then it's like, we better learn how to figure out the science of what's happening up there, so that we can do things like, predict when there's going to be an eclipse. Because those people really believed that eclipses brought big changes in power. Like whoever your king was, the lords of the land. And so they were very interested in, well, when is that going to change next? And so in the modern day, we think of astrology, well, probably not this group, but in general, astrology is sort of a pseudoscience, woo-woo, fake, what part of pop culture, but not part of actual science. And we think of like astronomy, that's a real science. Math, yeah, real thing. And so it's important, as we're kind of thinking about this, to go back in time in our minds to a period where these two were totally interwoven, and the science was developed to explain and help predict what was going to happen in the sky, because they believed it meant something. So I feel like that part is important to understand. And the more we think of astrology and sort of the science, the math, the astronomy as being interleaved, honestly, the more sense it all makes. And we'll revisit this again at the end. Okay, so I was pretty instantly confronted with what do I want the ratio of like math equations versus like science and helping people understand the concepts. What do I want that ratio to look like? So I am airing for this episode on, let me get the science concepts through, and we will talk about some math, but I'm trying to keep a little bit of distance from a bunch of equations, because I feel like we can go there later if we want to, but I want this to be something everyone can engage with and have a lot of fun with and get something out of, even if math is not your favorite thing and science is not your favorite thing. So we will see how this goes. This is going to be a little bit of an experiment for all of us. All right.
That's okay. I'm here for it.
I know, and you're amazing, Christy. I feel like this was maybe your idea originally. Okay. Can I do this? This? Yes. Okay. And I wonder if I can move this around a little bit so I can still see you all and a little bit of the chat. Okay, perfect. And Christy, if there's any questions that come in that are super relevant, please just give a shout out, because it's a little bit hard for me to look at the slides and look at the chat and look at you.
Sure, absolutely.
All right.
Will do.
So let's dive into this a little bit, just to start. Very, very basic. We have I think everybody here knows some clear-cut zodiac signs, right? Everyone probably knows what's called their sun sign, their main zodiac sign. Christy, for example, has said a bunch of times on the channel, she is an Aquarius.
Mhm.
If we look at the night sky, there are not just 12 constellations, you know, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, all the way around. The night sky looks more like this, where
Yeah.
there are many, many stars. Um, and there aren't just like 12, just, you know, it's not like we look up in the sky and there's a sign that says, oh, Aquarius. And we're like, yes, that is Aquarius. The night sky looks much more organic and chaotic.
Mhm.
Astrology is a very ordered system, but that is not what the night sky looks like, at least not at first glance.
Mhm.
Um, Maybe people have seen a chart, something like this before, but this basically is a map of constellations. So out of this sort of complete lack of order, lack of anything, just bunches and bunches of stars in the night sky. More ancient peoples started essentially connecting the dots and saying, oh, you know
Mhm.
what this set of dots together looks like? It looks like a bull, and this looks like a hunter, and this looks like a winged Pegasus. And so we have kind of people were starting to pull pictures out of this massive stars. And for many of us, if you live in a city or in a place where there's a lot of light pollution, you might look up and not see very many constellations. You might just see a
Mhm.
couple of the big ones, like Orion is really big in the northern hemisphere. But if you go to a place where there is almost no light and you look up, there are billions and billions of stars, and it is just awe-inspiring. If you
Yeah.
haven't seen that, please try to go see that. Just look at the night sky.
Mhm.
And if we think about ancient people, this was a time before electricity. You know, they just had candles, and somebody had to make those candles if they wanted to have light after dark. So they did not have a bunch of street lamps and all this light. When the sun went down, they were staring at that night sky all of the time. And
Mhm.
so they, you know, I mean, picture being in that time and you kind of look up at the sky and maybe you're with your kids or relatives or friends and you're like, oh, I think this looks like this. And you kind of start to draw pictures in the sky. And of course, because you know the Greeks and the Romans, they had a whole pantheon of gods, a lot and
Mhm.
huge sets of mythological stories. They sort of patterned these pictures that they were drawing with the figures in the mythologies. And this is where you get like Orion, the hunter, and you get these big mythological characters.
Mhm.
And there are whole books you can read about this if you're interested, but the whole night sky is very connected, you know, and you can kind of see that Orion is shooting towards Taurus the bull, and there's a mythology around that. And you can kind of see all of these figures all across the night sky, kind of in a big play, like a big drama,
Mhm.
you know, interacting with
Mhm.
each other in all of these ways.
Right.
Um, Okay, I promise we're going to get to like science and math people, but I feel like somehow this stage setting is important. Um,
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it.
so as this went on, of course, everybody, you know, probably had fun drawing their own connect the dots and the stars. But over time, you know, there was sort of a consolidation and like, okay, well, this is this constellation. This is this
Mm.
constellation. And there were kind of agreements. And this happened a long time ago, you know. So again, this was kind of the Hellenistic era. This was not modern. Um,
Right.
Currently, the International Astronomical Union recognizes 88 constellations.
Oh,
So,
wow.
you know, there's kind of the thought already of like, well, why do we have 12 zodiac signs if there are 88 constellations?
Mm.
And we start to get the answer to that when we look at this picture. So we can see that there is this line that's labeled as the equator, and it goes approximately through, the center of this sphere that is our Earth. There's another line called the ecliptic, which intersects the equator, but which is not parallel to the equator. Now, I want to pause there a second because this is critical and foundational, and pretty much everything we talk about from here on out is grounded in the fact that the equator and the ecliptic are not the same. And we'll talk about what the ecliptic is. So for starters, I think everybody knows what the equator is, right? We know there's the North Pole up here, the South Pole down here, and the equator is the line right around the middle of the Earth.
Right.
Now, the ecliptic and the equator would be exactly the same line if, as the Earth rotated on its axis, if it were straight up and down with the North Pole pointing up and the South Pole pointing down. The Earth does not do that. The Earth is tilted.
Right.
Does that sound familiar to anyone, or is this a totally new idea? I'm trying to, pull things out. And I would love it if people kind of drop in comments like, yes, I'm following, or no, you totally lost me at that last point, because I know everyone is coming in with a little bit of a different knowledge of science and math.
Right. Well, and I'm on board, so I'm tracking.
So far, so
good.
Perfect. So we're talking about the Earth, and we're talking about how it's tilted just a little bit as it rotates around its axis. The Earth, of course, does not exist as the only thing in our solar system. The Earth revolves around the sun, and other planets in our solar system do too. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, all of the planets we talk about in astrology, they all revolve around the sun. So all of these planets move around the sun in these axes, just going around and around these orbits. And the Earth, instead of being straight up and down, is tilted with respect to our orbit and everybody else's orbit around the sun. The ecliptic, this line here that kind of goes up towards the left, this line is the plane of our solar system. So this is the plane that is flat in comparison to the sun and Mercury and Venus and Uranus and all of the other planets.
Oh, okay.
So our equator, which we think of as just like straight east and west, it is in relation to our Earth, in relation to our north and south poles. But in relation to the bigger solar system, we're tilted. And our equator is tilted. And that plane of the rest of the solar system, that is the ecliptic. So let's take okay. I love it, Christy. I'm using you as my gauge.
No, that's okay. No, I'm good. That I did not even know that. So.
Okay, perfect. So we're learning. Good things are happening already. Okay. So if we even look back at this for 1 second, if it is true that the ecliptic is the plane of the solar system, and the equator is kind of the plane of the Earth, which is tilted with respect to the solar system, where will we see the sun and planets show up in the sky? And the answer is we will only ever see them show up on the ecliptic. That is exactly right, Ben. Because that is the plane of the solar system. So, if we look at this picture here, we see towards the top of the chart, we see like an upside down Draco. We see the Little Dipper, Ursa Minor. We will never see Saturn move in front of Ursa Minor. We will never see the sun move in front of Orion. All of the planets and the sun, they will only ever show up. We can see them in the sky. We can see Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. We need, a telescope to see. All of the others we can see with the naked eye. Venus is actually gorgeous right now, shortly after sunset, if anyone wants to go out and look towards the west. But we can look in the sky. We can see all of these planets, and they will always be on this ecliptic line. All of them, always.
Oh.
So ancient people, again, you have nothing else to do. You have no electric lights. You are staring up at the sky night after night after night. And they started to realize that most of the stars stayed in exactly the same place, right? We look up and we see Orion. Probably most people in the Northern Hemisphere have seen Orion at least at some point. And Orion, and Millie, the ecliptic as opposed to elliptic. Elliptic is the shape of all of the orbits the planets make around the sun, but ecliptic is the actual kind of equator of the solar system, the plane of the solar system. Okay, so as people are looking up, they see Orion. Orion is in the same position every night, right? It's got the 3 stars that make up its belt. It's not like the 3 stars in the belt are moving away from each other, right? Anytime you see Orion, those 3 stars, always there. They realized almost all of the stars stayed in their locations. However, there were a few stars that moved. And those stars that moved only moved along this ecliptic line. And, ancient people were like, what are those? And the word planet actually means wandering one, wandering star. And it's because if you look at a planet like Venus, Mercury, out in the you go outside at night, you look up, they look just like a star. But if you watch them night after night, they move. And none of the stars in Orion's belt do not move. So the planets were basically called the wandering ones. And they were given the names of gods and goddesses because the idea was, they are not fixed or constrained or confined. They can move. I love that Chipotle is happening here in the chat. Yum.
Right. And I did not know that the word planet came from the wandering one. That is like poetic and beautiful and like soul touching to me.
It's so true. And so much of the history of all of this is so beautiful. It genuinely is. So again, these people who, didn't have the internet, they didn't have electric lighting. They had started drawing pictures of all of these connecting the dots with stars in the sky, creating their own pictures and meanings. And then they noticed that a small group of these stars moved night after night, and they only ever moved along this line, which is called the ecliptic. So immediately we can see why there are not 88 zodiac signs, because the only constellations the planets will ever move through are the ones on the ecliptic. So if we have, again,
I always wondered how that worked.
So again, if we look up here towards the top and we see Draco is near the North Pole in the US, we will never see any of the wandering ones, any of the planets in front of Draco, or Cepheus, or Cassiopeia, or Perseus, any constellation that is not on the ecliptic, the planets will not move through. So
that is so cool.
It is. So we know that we are automatically constrained to, if we say, oh, Saturn is in Pisces, Well, Pisces must
Right.
be on the ecliptic then. Aquarius
Mm-hmm.
must be a
Mm-hmm.
constellation on the ecliptic. Gemini must be a constellation on the ecliptic. And in fact, they all are. These are the 12 constellations that circle the ecliptic. And so, we looked at our very initial thing, which looks just like a little bit of a chaotic night sky. We see, okay, we started to create some
Mm-hmm.
order to it. We started to group stars into these constellations. We realized that these wandering stars, these planets, move through the sky and they only move along the ecliptic. And we can actually even see here, I don't know if you all can see my mouse or not, but if you look all the way to the left on the ecliptic, there's Gemini. This is what Gemini looks like in the night sky, and the heads of the twins here are Castor and Pollux. They're two really bright stars, very easy to see. If anybody's into star watching, go out. You can see these zodiac signs in the sky, again, depending on the time of year. So
now we do have a quick question. I'm sure you're probably getting
go
to
for it,
it.
please. Oh,
What about
yes. Okapus.
this is like the problem
It is
child
the
of the
problem
zodiac.
child. And yes, I am going to talk about this. Maybe this is a good time to talk about, actually. This is the first time I'm giving this talk, so we're learning as we go. I would say about once every 3.5 years, a Twitter, Instagram, YouTube explosion happens where they're like, oh my God, there is a 13th zodiac sign. And it is Okapus. And oh my gosh, we all might not be the zodiac signs we think we are. There's a 13th sign. What are we going to do about this? So this is not a new thing, regardless of what YouTube and Twitter and Instagram and everyone else would like to tell us. This constellation is just as old as all of the others, but this constellation is barely on the zodiac. So when the zodiac was being developed, because Okapus kind of just has one foot over the zodiac line, but isn't fully on the zodiac, it was made as a decision not to include that constellation. And for ancient people, I guess Hellenistic isn't quite ancient, but older civilizations, numerology was really important to people, like really, really, really important. And 12 was viewed as being an incredibly practical number. These people did not have calculators. If they had to divide, 5 by 13, that's a lot of work, right? Somebody has to do that all manually. And 12 is so easy to divide into different things. You can divide it by 2, you can divide it by 3, you can divide it by 4, you can divide it by 6. So 12 was viewed as kind of a number of like perfection. And again, logically, that makes sense because it made it so much easier for them to do math in a time before calculators. But also there were a lot of religious and numerological reasons. Like for example, in the Christian faith, there are 12 apostles. There are 12 tribes of Israel. 12 was, there were religious, spiritual reasons why it was considered important in the Greek and Roman times, and practical reasons why it was easier to do math. I feel like if they would have had 13 zodiac signs and been trying to like divide 7 by 13 and everything, astrology probably would not have gotten as far as it did. But there was a lot of the math you could do in your head, because most people could say, 3 divided by 12 is 1/4. And it's easy, no long strings of decimal point numbers. So that is kind of a long answer. Basically, yes, that constellation Okapus is technically on the ecliptic, but only by a little bit. The ancients decided not to include it, so we do not include it either. And it's between Scorpio and Sagittarius, in case anyone's curious. And I think I may even, do I have a picture? I may have a picture. I can't remember if I have a picture later on that shows where it's just a little bit over onto the ecliptic.
And while we're, somebody had asked, oh, I'm not going to say your name right. Hini had said to talk about Aries. We are going to do a whole show on Aries and Pisces energy because this year we are going back and forth between that. So we're in Pisces, then we go to Aries, and then we come back to Pisces, and we go back to Aries. And because there's such different energies, it's the first zodiac sign, the last zodiac sign. You've got fire, you've got water, you've got infant, newborn, you've got, older soul, wise. We will be talking about that. So stay tuned for that because I wanted to make sure, because it is such a huge part of this year, that we addressed that so you guys could understand how really different those energies are. So, Heaney. Okay, I got
Right.
it. So I just wanted to touch on that, so you didn't think that we were ignoring you, but so that we could. Dawn says, "What? A whole show about me? You must be the Aries, Dawn."
All right.
Okay, this is amazing. I didn't know there was all of this.
Yeah, we
to
are
it.
working our way through little bit by bit. So that is how we got
Right.
from kind of the crazy chaotic night sky with billions of stars down to basically this.
Mhm.
This is looking at
Right.
the ecliptic, and it's ignoring everything else. So yes,
Mhm.
Orion is in the sky,
Mhm.
Polaris, the North Star, is in the sky. Those are all in the sky. But for the purpose of astrology, most of the time we don't do anything with those stars. Frankly, there's a whole branch of like astrological study around the fixed stars. Super interesting, fascinating, but for most of basic astrology, we don't do anything with those fixed stars. We deal with these
Mm.
constellations, which are around the ecliptic, because that is where we see the planets, the wandering ones, move through. Now,
Right.
so
Right.
everybody has heard of the zodiac, right? The zodiac is our collection of 12 signs. And
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
word zodiac derives from, and I'm going to mispronounce this because it turns out my ancient Latin is not that good, or my ancient Greek, which is where this came from originally. It comes from the ancient Greek zodiakos, which means a cycle or circle of little animals.
Mhm.
And if we
Mhm.
think about the constellations that are around the ecliptic, they are almost all animals. People or animals like crabs and scorpions and lions. And so the
Right.
zodiac was basically defined as the set of constellations that move, that kind of circle the ecliptic and lie on the ecliptic.
Mhm.
And so these are the ones that we see planets move through. So I have said, I know on Christie's channel, probably approximately 18 gazillion times, I have said, oh, this planet is in Sagittarius, or this planet is in Aries, or this planet is moving from Aquarius to Pisces. When I say that,
Right.
like let's think back to our solar system. We've got the sun in the middle, and then we've
Mhm.
got Mercury and Venus and Earth all revolving around the sun. These stars in these constellations are light years away, people. Light years and light years. Each one of these stars that we see in the sky at night, each one of these is the size of our sun. Our sun is just one star, and we can see all of these billions and billions
Mhm.
of stars. So like Venus is not actually in Sagittarius. Even if we look at like Sagittarius
Mhm.
here, all of these little stars that we connect the dots into a little tiny archer in the night sky to represent Sagittarius, these stars in Sagittarius are probably hundreds or thousands of light years away from each other. So Venus is
Right.
not next to these stars. So, what we
Right. Right.
mean when we say that a planet is in a sign is we mean that from the perspective of the Earth, if we look up at the sky and we see Venus, it appears to be in front of Sagittarius. The backdrop of stars, the background, is Sagittarius, and Venus is in the foreground. It's very, very far away from all of those stars, but it looks like it's in front of them. And we can kind of see that in this picture. So here we see the Earth, which is revolving around the sun. This is what we do. And when we look at the sun, based on where the Earth is right here in this picture, the sun is in Leo. Can we see that? How that line basically goes straight to Leo? So the sun is actually nowhere close to Leo. But from the perspective of the Earth, it looks like it is in front of Leo. So we say the sun is in Leo. And then as the Earth moves around its orbit, the sun appears to move through all of the zodiac signs. But in fact, of course, the sun is not moving. The other planets are Venus, Mercury, and we'll talk about retrogrades and why the sun doesn't retrograde, and we'll talk about that. We'll get there. But this is why the sun, we say the sun is in Leo, is in Cancer, is in Gemini. It's because that's where it appears to be from the Earth. Any questions so far?
No, this is really interesting because I always kind of wondered all of this.
Yeah, we're getting there.
This is exciting. I'm learning a
Yay,
lot.
that is exactly what we want.
This is good. Yes.
Okay. So now so what have we done so far? Quick recap. We went from crazy night sky to semi-ordered night sky with a bunch of constellations to just focusing on the 12 that are around the ecliptic, which basically then the Greeks gave the name zodiac to, because it was a circle of mostly animals. Okay. And we've talked, and it was actually, it was the Babylonians way back that actually divided the ecliptic into 12 equal signs. Because, okay, there's one more little piece we have to talk about before we go on. If you look at these constellations here, these are actually all accurate constellations. This is what these constellations look like in the night sky. They are not the same size. Can we see how little, for example, Aries is versus how big Scorpius is? So things get a little bit confusing, right? If the sun is pointing, currently the sun appears to be right in front of Leo. But then as the Earth moves along counterclockwise in its revolution around the sun, we're going to hit sort of a dead zone, right, between Leo and Virgo. So at what point do we say Leo stops and Virgo starts? So this is getting a little bit tricky, right? Because again, it's not like we look up at the sky and there are clear lines in the sky that say like boundary between Leo and Virgo. We made up. We totally made up all of these constellations. Some are bigger than others. Yes, we have a really nice even number of them, 12, but they are not all the same size. So the way the ancient Babylonians solved this, and they solved this even before we get into the more modern Greeks and Romans in the Hellenistic era, is they basically picked some stars that were very prominent and defined those as the beginning of certain signs. So for example, they placed the beginning of Cancer at the very end of what they called the rear twin star of Gemini. So Pollux is the head of the second twin, and it's a bright star. And so they basically said, once we get past Pollux, the head of that second twin, we're going to say Cancer starts there. And similarly, they defined the beginning of Aquarius at the rear star of the goatfish. which is Deneb el-Gedi. And the goatfish is Capricorn. So when you get to that very last star of Capricorn, they were like, okay, and then Aquarius starts. So again, all of this, there's an element of, we invented this. We chose the constellations. We chose that there were going to be 12 zodiac signs, and we chose how to cleanly divide them. But I'm trying to make it super clear to everybody. It's not straightforward to just say, oh, Venus is in Sagittarius. Like, where does Sagittarius start and Scorpio stops? There's a gap between all of these. And here we can see Ophiuchus, where, you know, we can see like Ophiuchus's little feet are over the ecliptic, but the majority of the constellation is actually not on the ecliptic. So it was decided that one would not count. So they basically came up with an early system by pulling the brightest and most important stars out of the constellations and saying, okay, we're going to define the boundary between, you know, each of the signs here. And they picked a couple of really bright stars like Deneb el-Gedi, like Pollux that we talked about. And then they said, okay, we're going to divide the zodiac evenly around these really bright stars. So as many people, if you have looked at a birth chart at all, your own or anyone else's, the zodiac signs are all 30 degrees each. So a circle, for those of you who took geometry, are interested in geometry, one circle, does anybody know how many degrees that is? One circle all the way around. If you make a right turn or a left turn, how many, do we know what angle that is? Yes.
90?
Yes.
Am I right?
90-degree angle when you make a left or a right. And we've got 4 of those in a circle. So 90 degrees times 4, 360 degrees. Ben knows that's how many degrees there are in a circle.
Oh, Lord, I knew that. I was trying to make it so complicated.
It's okay. It is okay. And so and I realize I'm kind of putting people on the spot, and you're the one I can see, Christy. So you
No. You're good.
But
you're good.
Got our
See, I'm trying to
360-degree circle, right? Because we all agree the Earth is a sphere. It's a circle. We're all good with that. It's not a square. We don't live on a triangle. Yep, exactly, Millie. 90 degrees. So they base, and again, you know, thinking about like the 13th constellation, little Ophiuchus over here, it's like no one wanted to divide 360 degrees by 13. That just didn't sound fun.
Right.
But if you take 360 degrees and you divide it by 12, you get 30. Nice, even 30-degree pie slice for every one of these constellations. So again, they took a couple of the bright stars and said, okay, you know, here's Gemini, here's Pollux over here on the very end. We're going to say the start of this is Cancer. 30 degrees later, we're going to start Leo. 30 degrees later, we're going to start Virgo. So everybody tracking so far, we picked a couple of important stars, defined those as boundary points, and then said, okay, 30 degrees, 30 degrees. Every sign, no matter whether it's a big sign with lots of stars or a small sign with a few amount of stars, they all get an equal 30 degrees. So far, so good, friends?
Yes. And so then this is making the cusps make more sense, and where your sun is actually at in those degrees as far as your personality and everything else, why it matters. It's because if you're closer to one versus smack dab in the middle or closer to the end, you're going to have those traits. Okay, I'm tracking with you. And
what a great call out, Christy.
Okay.
You are exactly correct. That if you are cuspy and the sun, when you were born, looks like it's sort of in between, say, Leo and Virgo, like, yes, we defined boundaries. You know, we older humans defined boundaries between these signs, but you are probably gonna have a little bit of both because again, this isn't all the night sky is not super clear cut and cleanly divided. Whereas, in this
Right.
picture, um, for example, we can basically see that like if we take this March 21st right here, we can look and
Mhm.
see, oh, the sun just
Mhm.
does appear to be in front of Pisces, right in the middle, very clearly in Pisces.
Mhm.
And we
Mhm.
talked about
Mhm.
the mysterious 13th zodiac sign already, so I don't need to cover that here. But yes,
Mhm.
just so everybody notes, here's our little 13th zodiac sign, just tipping the little feet over into the zodiac opacus.
And I love that visual because I did not realize that it was like such a big
Yeah,
constellation, and so it is. And this is a crude way of saying it, but it's kind of like, um, y- yeah, it's like he's just got a toe in there, but the rest of him, it's like he's
he's
not
not
fully
fully
committed, so
committed.
you
That's
don't
right.
get to. Yeah, you're not fully committed. You got some commitment issues, so you just sit
That's
yourself
right.
over there. We're gonna.
Yes. Whereas the others are more committed, more on the zodiac.
Right, right. They're like, we're here. We're here. Let's go. What are we doing? And then you got him. He's like, I mean, you can have my
That's
toe.
right. That's right. Just a little. Yes.
That's all you
Yes.
get.
All right. So we talked a little bit about ecliptic equator, and I want to show this
Mhm.
now, just so we take the stars out of it. We talked a lot
Mhm.
about stars. We're setting those aside for a minute, just so
Right.
that people can kind of see. And this here in the center, this little ball that looks like a marble, this represents the Earth. And we can see its north
Mhm.
celestial pole and south celestial pole. We can see
Right.
that this is basically like it's tilted. It is not exactly north
Mhm.
south. It does not align with our north and south magnetic pole, with our north pole and south pole,
Mhm.
at the ice caps. Does not align with that.
Mhm.
So we basically have this sense of the flat purple circle that we are seeing here. This is the ecliptic, the plane of the solar system. So the Earth moves around the sun just like this, but we can see that it's tilted. So while the Earth is
Right.
moving around this, the sun, it is tilted at an angle. And
Mhm.
this also gives us our seasons, which we'll talk about too. If Earth were straight up and down, there would be no seasons. So,
Right. 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 Now, Ben was just asking about true
yes.
north.
Okay. Uh, okay. Ben comes in with the good questions. So, okay. The short answer, Ben, is true north is something else entirely. So there is celestial north, which is basically perpendicular to the plane of the ecliptic. That's celestial north. There is also the north, um, like the exact north point that the Earth spins around. We see that here.
Mhm.
The Earth is like a top, right? It spins on its axis, but
Mhm.
it spins on its axis
Mhm.
while it's tilted. So we have celestial north,
Mhm.
perpendicular to the plane of the sun and all of the other planets. We have
Mhm.
true north, which is the exact top point that the Earth spins around. And then
Mhm.
we have magnetic north. So if you treat the Earth as a
Oh
magnet,
wow.
which you kind of can because we have an iron core, iron is highly magnetizable. True north, Ben,
Right.
basically means it's the very top of the spinning axis, but that is not exactly the
Mhm.
same as the magnetic north if you treat our Earth as a magnet. Um,
And so then to answer Millie's question, she said North Node is in Pisces right now. So is that true north for now? So the answer
no,
to that would be
no,
no.
But I love these
'Cause it's
questions. These are the greatest
completely
possible
different.
questions. And Millie, my friend, we are going to get to what the North Node in Pisces means. We are so going to get there. So going to get there. Because there is one very important thing we have not talked about so far. And friends, it is the moon. We have not talked about the moon at all. Now, one might think, oh, the moon probably also moves around the ecliptic. Well, one would be wrong, sadly, if one thought that. So we have essentially 3 orbits we care about. We have the Earth's equator. We do care about the Earth's equator. We measure all of our latitude off of it. We care. We have the ecliptic, which is like the celestial equator that lines up with the sun and all of the other planets. And then as the moon orbits the Earth, it orbits at an angle that is not the celestial equator, nor is it the ecliptic. It has its own angle. So please, everyone, stop and allow that to sink in. Think about the, how overcomplicated this makes things, because it does. If the Earth either lined up exactly with the Earth's equator or with the ecliptic, that would be so nice. That would, all the math would just work.
Right.
Then we could say, oh, the sun and the moon and all of the planets, they all show up on this ecliptic. But instead we have to be like, no, the moon is a little bit of a rebel. So anyway, we're going to talk about the moon, and that is where we're going to get into the North Node. We're getting there. We are getting there. Okay. If we look at this picture, what do we notice? Does anyone notice anything interesting here? This is an actual photograph. We have Jupiter and Venus and Mars and Saturn. This is great. Look at all these visible planets. That's so cool, right?
Right.
Why is the moon down here? Why is the moon the only one not in this nice straight line? And the answer is, as Millie started pointing us to, the moon is not exactly on the ecliptic. So all of these other planets nicely lined up on the ecliptic. The sun, if the sun were in the sky right now, also on the ecliptic. The moon mostly on the ecliptic. But if you chart the moon over time, the moon basically moves like this, where it sort of goes around the ecliptic, but it typically is not right on it. And so we can see, like in this picture, for example, the moon is lower. The moon is off the ecliptic. Does everybody see that?
That is
nice straight
crazy.
line, and then the moon. Everybody's good with that?
So for my Wi-Fi friends out there, I know you guys are like, because the aliens put it there.
I mean, it could be. It could be.
That's what's going through my mind is Hecklefish and the aliens put it there. But that's very interesting that it goes like this. It like snakes around
it
that.
Does. It
that
snakes
line.
around it.
That's very interesting.
And so if you look at the moon night after night after night, you will see that like these planets, not retrogrades. We'll talk about retrogrades in like, I don't know, a bit, but not yet. But apart from retrogrades, all of these planets like Jupiter is just going to keep moving along this line, Venus along this line, Mars, Saturn, they're all going to move on this line. Everybody stays on this line except for the moon.
Right.
Which basically, it weaves up, it weaves down. Okay. Everybody good with that? This is going to be important shortly. Okay.
I got it.
I'm using you as my litmus test.
That's okay. No, because if I can get it, then we're good. That is the truth.
All right. Perfect. So, okay, so we can see this. We can see that we have all of the planets along this ecliptic line except for the moon, and we're going to come back to that moon and talk about that moon. But the fact that the Earth is on this tilt, this gives us some really special things. It gives us seasons. And the, as
Right.
a lot of people know, the closer you are to the equator, the seasons don't tend to be quite as like 4 seasons. It tends to be more like dry season and monsoon season. But all of these seasons are
Right.
related to the fact that the Earth is tilted. And for those of us who are in the northern hemisphere right now, kind of in the depth of the cold winter, this is a lot different than when it's summer and it's like 100 degrees. This is a lot different. Who would think that the Earth being tilted just a
Right.
little would do this? But it does.
Mhm.
Did
Right.
historical peoples care about solstices and equinoxes? Oh, my friends, yes, they did. Yes, they so did.
Right.
Does this look familiar to anybody? Anybody?
Yes.
Stonehenge? And there are
Right.
similar
Love it.
structures all over the world. Mayan temples, all
Mhm.
kinds of remains that have been found that basically align
Mhm.
to solstice or equinox times. And just
Mhm.
as a refresher, equinoxes occur when the day and the night are exactly the same number of hours, 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of nighttime. And the solstices are when we get the longest day of the year in the summer and the shortest day of the year in the winter.
Mhm. Mhm.
These were such important times to ancient peoples. They basically patterned growing crops and rituals and ceremonies. They patterned all of these after the seasons, and they divided those seasons by the solstices and the equinoxes. If anyone does a
Mhm.
lot with, much of the Druid Celtic mythology, this is used a lot
Mhm.
in Wiccan as well. There's kind of this
Right.
concept of the uh, the four solstices and equinoxes, and then the 4 cross
Mhm.
quarter festivals, which are midway in
Mhm.
between those, dividing our
Mhm.
year into 8 equal segments. This was
Mhm.
all based on solstices and equinoxes. So, yes, the ancient peoples cared greatly. This
Right.
shows us why the Earth's tilt gives us seasons. Um,
Mm.
and the reason I am including this, you might hear seasons and think like, well, winter and spring, those don't have anything to do with astrology, which
Mhm.
um, in a modern sense, that's true. But in
Mhm.
an ancient sense, that is not true.
Right.
Ancient people saw the sun, the time when the sun was in Aquarius, as a very cold, windy, shivery
Mhm.
kind of time. That's why
Mhm.
Aquarius is the sign of fixed air. It's like the most
Mhm.
air. The wind just dries out your skin and, just, brings a shiver to your bones. And so the seasons were very integral. Leo, the lion, radiant, bright, the longest days of summer, the most warmth. There is
Right.
a correspondence in the symbolism of all of the zodiac signs with the time of year when the sun appeared to be in front of them. So if we
Mhm.
look, the summer solstice, again, I'm going to just assume most of us are in the United States. If you're
Mhm.
not, just look for where your area would be on the map. But we can see that around June 20th to 22nd, the
Mhm.
sun is basically pointing directly at the US, right, in the northern
Mhm.
hemisphere. Now, the
Mhm.
southern hemisphere is tilted away from the
Mhm.
sun. And then likewise, we see over on the other side of the picture, around the winter solstice, the northern hemisphere is tilted away from the sun. The southern hemisphere is tilted towards the sun.
Mhm.
And then at these two in between points, the vernal and autumnal equinox, basically the north and south hemisphere get the same amount of sunlight and the same amount of nighttime. So we
Mhm.
can kind of see how a lot of our daily lives, our seasons, our years, it would look very different if the Earth were not tilted at this 23.5-degree angle. If it were
Right.
tilted more than this, we would
Mhm.
have way more intense seasons. Winter would be way more intensely cold because we would be tilted even further away from the sun. The summer would be
Mhm.
even hotter. So this 23.5 degrees gives us the seasons we have, the temperature swings during the year that we have.
Right. Okay.
If anyone has questions or I'm starting to lose anybody, let me know.
No,
I
I
feel like we
think
talked about, okay, we're good with the
I
tilt of
think
the earth.
we're good. Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect, perfect. And we're good on the equator versus the ecliptic.
Mhm.
Okay, perfect. All right. Now, um,
Tina says, I'm allowing the information to marinate in my brain for a while. Eventually, the synapses will brighten everything in there.
I love that so much. Yes, Tina, that's a perfect strategy. I love marinating and letting the synapses do what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so I considered not talking about the tropical versus sidereal zodiac because everybody here uses the tropical zodiac, whether you realize it or not, but it actually is important. And there are some people, you know, if you're telling them about astrology and they'll say, oh, that isn't even real. And they will bring
Mhm,
this up as an argument why it's not real. And
mhm,
so,
mhm.
and it's a completely false, misunderstood argument. So I'm bringing it up here.
Okay,
Okay. All right, friends, we're going to dive in together.
let's do
So,
it.
um, okay, even before we look at that, um, remember how we talked about that the division of each of the zodiac signs way
Mhm,
back in ancient Babylon, people picked a couple of key stars that were really bright.
mhm,
And they said, okay, this is the rear star of Gemini, Pollux. So we're going to say when the sun or planet or whatever passes this, it's now in the
mhm.
next sign.
Right.
Okay. Um, at the time when astrology was really starting to be systematized and developed and written
Mm,
down and taught in schools and taught,
mhm,
um, the beginning of the constellation of Aries occurred at the spring equinox.
okay.
So let's take a second there. What that means is that, you know, we're headed towards the spring equinox right now.
Mhm.
What for those of us in the northern hemisphere, what is longer right now? Day or night? Light hours or dark hours? Dark hours are longer, but
Mhm.
they are getting shorter.
Right.
And when we get to the equinox, equa means equal. When we get
Mhm.
to the equinox, we will have the same number of hours of daylight and dark.
Right, right.
Yes, so far so good,
Mhm, mhm.
everybody?
Yep,
Okay.
yep, yep,
Okay.
yep.
So when we hit that point where there is the same number of hours of daylight and nighttime, 2,000 years ago, approximately, when astrology was being systematized, the sun moved exactly into the constellation of Aries at that time. So both
Okay,
things happened at once, which was really
okay.
convenient, right? Very
Right,
convenient
right.
because you could say, "Oh, on the day when the day and night have equal length, that's
Mhm.
that's that's Aries. The sun just moved into Aries. It's Aries season."
Right, right,
And
right.
symbolically, it made a lot of sense because Aries is the beginning of the zodiac. It's a fire sign. It's like, yeah, this is
Mhm.
when we would switch from like
Right.
day from nighttime being longer to daylight
Mhm,
being longer. You know, Aries has that like
mhm.
go get them that's going to bring the increasing light, bring spring.
Right, right.
So, this was true 2000 years ago approximately.
Mhm.
Um this is no longer true. So let's take a moment and we'll talk about why it's not true, but this is not true anymore. On the
Okay.
equinox, which is probably going to hit sometime around, I don't know, March 21st or something this year,
Mhm,
um,
mhm,
this, and you look up at the sky, the
mhm,
sun will not be in front of Aries. If
mhm.
you physically look at the sky, the sun will be in front of Pisces. So,
The Earth is tilted wobbling
That is so
different or
true. Yes,
something like that?
Christy. Yes. Yes. So right.
I got
Gold star, Christy. Gold star. Yes. And I'm going to talk about that. And
it.
Millie,
Okay.
sidereal, is it also called Vedic? Vedic uses sidereal. So it's not that they're the same. Sidereal is the way of defining the zodiac signs, and Vedic, and Vedic has other names as well, Indian, Jyotish, that uses the sidereal zodiac. Okay, so these started to diverge. So the sun does not move over the beginning of Aries at the spring equinox anymore. And as Christy like she just queued us up, this is because of a super cool thing called the this should say precession. I bet autocorrect changed it to procession. It's right here, the precession of the equinoxes. So if you have ever spun a top, this is approximately what a spinning top does. And do we see that it is not straight up and down? Do we see that the top and the bottom are kind of tracing their own little wobbly circles? Like there is no exact bottom of this, right? Because we can see that this bottom is moving. And likewise, this top is moving. If I put my mouse here, we can see how clearly that's moving. So the Earth is also spinning on its axis. And the Earth is basically also doing this, just like a top would, because the physics is all the same, whether it's a ginormous planet or whether it's a tiny little top, it wobbles as it spins. What does this mean? If we look at this picture of Earth here, and we can see it's tilted at its approximately 23.5 degrees, that gives us our seasons. The top of the Earth, as this wobbles, and this is exaggerated for effect so you can see it more clearly. It's not actually, the top is not wobbling this much, but the top is wobbling as it spins. And so the North Pole of the Earth is tracing a circle. And right now, probably most people are familiar with the North Star, Polaris. It's the very tail in this little spoon of Ursa Minor. Right now, this star points due north. 2,000 years ago, this was not a North Star. It didn't point north. In about 12,000 years, give or take, Vega, in the constellation Lyra, the harp, is actually going to be much closer to the North Star. So Polaris, the North Star, that's only true because of when we live in history. Once Polaris is not the North Star anymore, it's going to be another roughly 25,000 years before the wobble of the Earth's top takes it all the way back around to make Polaris the North Star again.
Oh my gosh.
Right. So this is a very slow wobble, everybody. When we looked at the top, it's like, this is really fast. Look at how fast. The Earth's wobble is very, very slow. For the top of the Earth to trace one little circle takes about 25,000 years. So
that is insane.
I'm going to do some very light approximate math just for people who are interested. So 25,000, I'm going to round this to 24,000 because the math is nicer. 24,000, 25,000, it's a lot of years, right? A lot of years. Okay. So 24,000 years. If we divide that by 12, which is how many zodiac signs we have, what do we get? And we get, does anybody know? It's okay if you don't. Okay, people. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. But you get about 2,000. 2,000 there. Ben's got it. Ben's on it with the math.
Got it.
2,000 times 12 zodiac signs is 24,000. So it has been about 2,000 years since astrology was kind of made into a system, since the point of Aries exactly corresponded with the spring equinox. And so it's been 2,000 years, we have moved about one zodiac sign away.
Oh,
So,
wow.
and it's not quite 30 degrees. It's actually, because again, it's 25,000, not 24,000. We are approximating a little bit.
Right.
But what this basically
Right.
means is that for those of us in the West, we use the tropical zodiac. We consider the start of Aries to still be when we hit the spring equinox. And you all, if you have a calendar that shows
Okay.
zodiac signs and you go look at it, the spring equinox is on the same day that Aries season starts. That is not a coincidence. We in the West, we
Right.
define it that way. And again, this was true actually like 2,000 years ago. But the earth has wobbled.
Right.
It's wobbled about 1/12 of the way around its wobble. So we are about one zodiac sign off. So what does this mean? This means if I tell you that the moon is in Gemini and you go outside and you look at the moon and you see it, the stars behind it will not be Gemini. They will be Taurus. So
don't panic.
Right. Don't panic. Don't panic. And people will use this to say, oh, astrology isn't true because those stars don't even line up anymore. But at the time astrology was developed, both of those things were true. That the first stars of Aries, the sun crossed those at the same time that the spring equinox, equal day, equal night occurred. That's not true anymore. So now, 2,000 years later, modern astrologers, like all of us, we have to pick what is more important to us. We either have to say, I care about the stars. So I physically want to see the moon in front of Gemini, or it doesn't count. I will not say the moon is in Gemini unless I go outside and look and I see the moon in front of the constellation of Gemini. That is the sidereal zodiac. And all of the East and India drove this effort. They do that. They basically say, I do not care about your solstices and your equinoxes. Don't care. I care what constellation the planets, the sun appear to be in front of. They took that route. In the West was so focused on solstices and equinoxes, everybody. Again, we talked about how the Druid festivals lined up with these, Stonehenge, all of these old temples were aligned around solstice and equinox times. This group cared. And so the Western group basically said, we don't care where those stars in other galaxies are. We are going to align all of this around the solstices and equinoxes. We think that's the important thing to care about. So astrologers 2,000 years ago had it a little bit easier. Both of those things were true. The start of Aries, also spring equinox. All modern astrologers, we have to pick one or the other. And Ben, you're so right, because of farming. And if you think about the climate of India versus the climate of the northern latitudes, of course, in India, they don't care as much about the solstices and equinoxes because their seasons are not the same as our seasons. They kind of have two seasons, the really rainy season and the drier season. But yeah, exactly. Like to Ben's point, the farming, if you are trying to farm in England or Norway, these like more northern countries, you have to know, when do I plant seeds? When do I water? When are they going to come up? When do I harvest? When do I plant for next year? So yeah, absolutely, Ben. I think farming was probably a big part of why the solstices and equinoxes were so important to people, especially further north, where you better be in touch with the seasons or your crops are not going to live and you're probably going to starve. Whereas there's a little
So
bit
now
more
I have
room
a
for,
question.
like in India, you can grow more things year round. So you've got more wiggle room. Go ahead, Christy.
So, no, that's okay. So, with the Vedic astrology, does that mean that so we would have completely different signs
100%.
in that
100%. Yep.
thing, and so then theirs is also constantly changing, right? So like it would
Yes.
change for a little while, but we would. That is
Well,
so interesting.
so
I
every
didn't know
25,000
that.
years, they line up again. So
Right.
we're like 2,000, we have
Right.
23,000 more years to go, but in 23,000 years, it'll all
Right.
line up again. Um,
It'll line up.
but
Wow.
there's like, our astrology changes and theirs does too. We're just tracking different
Mhm.
changes. So for us, we're saying,
Right.
I don't care where those constellations in the background are. Don't care.
Right.
Start of Aries is start of the spring equinox.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
over time, like in the sky, that shifts. That totally shifts.
Mhm.
And it moves backwards. It retrogrades. Just that's not important why, but it
Right.
does. So for example,
Right.
whatever sign you are in Western astrology, unless you're in the very last degrees of that sign, if your sun is at like
Mhm.
27 degrees,
Mhm.
28 degrees, yes, you'll still be that sign in Vedic astrology. But otherwise, you will be one sign earlier. So, like for you, Christy, that would be
Okay.
Capricorn instead of Aquarius.
Capricorn. Right. Ooh,
Yes. But
could be a
it's
sassy little
changing for
devilly thing.
everybody. It's just like
Right.
as the earth wobbles, the
Uh-huh.
sidereal zodiac people, Vedic, Indian, Jyotish, they are saying, I'm just looking
Uh-huh.
at the stars. I'm just tracking off of the stars. I don't care
Oh,
what the earth wobble is doing. I'm following the stars.
right.
In the West, us tropical zodiac people, we are saying, I just care when the spring
Mhm.
equinox is. That's the start of Aries. I'm not looking at what the earth wobble is doing.
Right. Right. How interesting.
Yes. Okay.
That
Has anyone heard of the
wow.
age of Aquarius to back us up from math a little bit? Has anybody
Yes,
heard?
I was just talking
Yes.
about it yesterday.
Okay. So I'm going to tell you what that is in case you didn't know, because it absolutely is related to this. So,
Right.
um, at the time when the spring equinox exactly aligned with Aries, with the start of Aries,
Mhm.
that was basically the end of the age of Aries. Then, when the spring equinox moved from the beginning of Aries and moved, retrograded back into Pisces, that's the age of Pisces, which is approximately 0 to 2000 AD. And this keeps the spring equinox keeps retrograding. So approximately now to 4000 AD is the age of Aquarius, when the spring equinox retrogrades from Pisces back into Aquarius. And there's some super
Oh,
interesting stuff with this,
okay.
people. Like, I can't even tell you. Like if you think about 4000 to 2000 BCE being the age of Taurus, that was the age when people were
Mhm.
starting to domesticate animals like cattle. They were starting to kind of
Mhm.
have flocks of things, and that was starting to correspond to kind of their
Right.
wealth and, what they were amassing. When you look at 2000 BCE to
Right.
about 0 AD, that was a time of war, huge empires
Mhm.
rising, whether it was the Greeks, the Romans, big empire, Genghis Khan kind of stuff, big empire building stuff.
Mhm.
And
Mm.
then if you look
Mhm.
at about 0 AD to 2000 AD, so to about current, there's been a big focus on
Right.
spirituality and religion. Huge religions have
Right.
risen. Christianity became
Yeah.
huge.
Mhm.
Islam became huge. Catholicism became huge.
Mhm.
This was, that's
Mhm.
it tracks with Pisces, and now we're looking
Right.
towards the age of Aquarius. which is a more innovative, less grounded in the material, more, potentially telepathic. Even if we look at the rise of the internet, for example, over the last 20 years, that's so Age of Aquarius, right? It's like electricity. It's like somehow we can, Christy, you and I can be looking at each other, even though we're, at least 1,000
Right.
miles away from each other. We're looking
Yeah,
at,
and
at some
3
of the,
time
the
zones.
Age of Aquarius. So when you hear Age of Aquarius,
Right.
this is that. This is because the Age of Aquarius
Right.
is when the spring equinox falls in Aquarius instead of Pisces, where it's been for about the last 2,000 years. But there's a whole lot of
Right.
interesting, historical astrology about, what these different, roughly 2,000 year periods mean for society. Cows, very important. Warriors, very important. Spirituality,
Right.
religions,
Right.
very important. Now we're moving into a new time of importance. Anyway, wanted to break up the math a
Right.
little.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is so interesting because, and especially once you get an idea of what the signs are when you and like what they represent, then this really falls in line. It's like it starts to click,
Yes.
and you're like, I got it. I got it. It makes sense. Okay, here we go.
Yes. And that also kind of means that there's we can see that, like, we think of astrology so often in these like smaller increments, like, okay, Pluto just moved into Aquarius, it's going to be there for 20 years, 20-year cycle. But
Right.
this wobble
Right.
of the earth actually creates these ginormous, really long, epic cycles that define whole,
Right.
epochs of human time.
Yes.
All
Right.
right. So we
Right.
talked through this a little bit. Yeah. And it'll be a while until we get back to, 0 degrees of Aries being the spring equinox again, because we are retrograding through
Right.
and we are only just getting to Aquarius. So we've got a whole bunch of the zodiac to go.
Right. Oh, wow.
Okay. Let me see if I talked about a lot. Yes. And I love how I think it was Millie preempted some of this, but yeah, Jyotish, Vedic, Indian astrologers, they do not, I don't
Right.
want to say they don't care at all about the solstices and equinoxes, but they care much less
Right.
than Western culture.
About it. That is so interesting.
Okay. Everybody take a breath. How are we doing?
Doing good. I always learn a lot from you, Karina. Anytime we get together, I am always learning something. But this is amazing. Like, I had no idea that there was all of this. I mean, I knew it was expansive, but I didn't quite get this.
Well, and we're still, honestly, we're scraping the surface a little bit because, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, you'll
Right.
notice there are not tons of equations here. We're doing a little bit of math.
Right.
All of this, though, if you've taken
Right.
geometry, it's geometry. That's exactly all of what all of this is.
Right.
But yeah, I would much rather that you all can understand how what we're doing with astrology relates to the sky. And then we can dive into the equations if you want. But yeah, the understanding is the important thing. Beyond that, it is literally just pure straight equations.
Right.
All right, so here we are
No,
at eclipses.
this is great.
So
Love
we
eclipses.
remember how we talked about our friend, the moon, who is the only one not on this nice, straight, amazing line. So what is up with that? So we talked about how the moon basically cycles through here in almost like a snake wave. And sometimes it's higher than the ecliptic, sometimes it's lower. The moon does what the moon wants to do, does not follow all of our rules. So if we look at the moon's orbital plane, this is kind of what it looks like. If this is the ecliptic, which is the straight line going through the Earth in this picture, the moon's orbit is about 5 degrees off of that. And so what that means is that as the moon orbits the Earth, it kind of might move up towards the ecliptic and pass it and be up here for a little while, and then it cycles back down, and then it cycles back up. But it's about 5 degrees away from the ecliptic, is kind of the maximum distance it gets.
Mhm.
So what does that mean? Okay, let me think about how to describe this, because this is important, and if everybody gets this, you're never going to wonder what an eclipse is ever again. So as the moon, does this snake pattern, this
Mhm.
wave around the ecliptic line, there are points where it crosses the ecliptic. Everybody tracking so far? Right? If it is
Mhm.
snaking
Mhm.
up and down around this line, it passes
Mhm.
through this ecliptic line.
Right. Okay.
Okay? When it
Mhm.
crosses this line going north, that is the north moon node. When it crosses the ecliptic going south, that is the south moon node.
Okay. Okay.
So
Okay.
far, so good.
Got it. Yes. And that's why they're in the opposite signs.
That is why they're in the opposite signs. That is exactly right.
Okay.
Because if you picture, um, this sort of shows,
Mhm.
but basically, if we look at this bottom picture here,
Mhm.
what this basically shows is we see the sun in the middle and we see the Earth at 4 different positions in its
Mhm.
orbit
Mhm.
around the sun. If we
Mhm.
look at this bottom one that says lunar eclipse, solar eclipse next to it,
Mhm.
as the Earth is moving around the sun, the
Mhm.
moon is moving around the Earth. And
Right.
as the
Right.
moon moves around the Earth, twice twice in each of its orbits at opposite points, it crosses the ecliptical plane.
Mhm.
And when it crosses that going down, south node. When it comes back
Right.
around the Earth and crosses it going north, up, that's the
Right.
north
Right.
node.
Right.
This is what lets us have eclipses. Because when the sun so the sun and the Earth, they're already on the ecliptic. We talked about this. They all
Mhm.
they all play
Mhm.
by the rules. Venus, Saturn,
Mhm.
everybody plays by the rules except the moon. When the moon is exactly in line in the same plane on the same ecliptic as the sun and the moon, then the sun can block out the moon, or the moon can block out the sun because they're in the same plane. It's
Okay.
basically like if you are in a car and the car in
Mhm.
front of you is like a big truck and you can't see over it and you can't see past it and you can't see around it and you're just like, I guess it's blocked. I can't see what the road looks like in front of me
Right.
because this
Right.
truck is in the
Right.
way. But
Right.
if you could actually rise up, if you had a flying car, like people used to think we would have by 2025, if you could go
Right.
straight up in your car above the truck,
Mhm.
then you would have a
Mhm.
full unobscured vision, right?
Right. Right.
But when you are in the same plane as the truck,
Mhm.
it blocks
Mhm.
your view. And so when the moon moves up and then it moves down, those are the
Right.
points where you are above or below the truck. You can see past the truck. But
Right. Right.
when the moon crosses these 2 points on the ecliptic, yeah, either the sun blocks the moon or the moon blocks the sun, but they are all in one row.
Right. Okay.
Um, Now, it is actually really weird that
Mhm.
we would get eclipses because the moon
Mhm.
is so much smaller than the sun, everybody. So much
Right.
smaller? How can the moon block out the sun? The moon is tiny, tiny compared to the sun, right?
Mhm.
True, but the moon is way closer, way closer. And we
Mhm.
kind of know this, right? Like if you look at a car and it's like a mile
Mhm.
away, it looks tiny.
Mhm.
Or you go to like the
Right.
top floor of a 50-story building and you look down, humans look so tiny walking on the
Right.
sidewalk down below. But humans
Right.
look big when you're standing right next to them.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so the moon is tiny, tiny, tiny compared to the sun. but the moon is way, 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 way closer than the sun.
Right.
So the moon appears a lot bigger to us because of that. So
Right.
just the way that the math works out, which again, it's crazy that it works out this way. We don't know why it works out this way. But if you take
Mhm.
the ratio of the moon diameter to its
Mhm.
distance from Earth, it's
Mhm.
basically the same as the sun, as the ratio of the sun's diameter to the sun's distance from Earth.
Oh, wow.
So they appear to be the same size.
Right.
They appear to be the same size. And so you can kind of see this in this picture. Again, the moon is way
Right.
smaller, but the moon
Right.
is
Right.
way closer. And
Right.
so we get this effect. And some people have probably heard of like total eclipses versus
Mhm.
partial eclipses. And you
Mhm.
can kind of see the optics here. But if you are in this
Mhm.
very dark section called the umbra,
Mhm.
this is a full total eclipse. If you look up,
Right.
you will just see like the little ring of fire around the moon, and that's
Yes.
all you'll see. Everything
Yeah.
will appear to be super dark. If you're in this like lighter gray area, things will be darker. And if you looked up, you would see
Mhm.
like a slice taken out of the sun, but it's not a
Mhm.
total eclipse. You would still be
Mhm.
able to see part of the sun. And
Mhm.
when an eclipse occurs, which again, you can kind of see this from this image, not every eclipse is visible everywhere on Earth. And everybody
Right.
probably knows this. We get 2 eclipse cycles a year. We
Right.
have one that's
Right.
coming up in March. So
Right.
eclipse cycles happen all the time. Why don't we see crazy rings around the sun all the time?
Mhm.
Because the eclipse is not equally visible everywhere. So, for example, if we look at this
Mhm.
picture, this eclipse is happening. How cool. The
Mhm.
US can't see it. It's nighttime
Mhm.
in the US. The US is on the other side of the world. We're looking at Africa.
Right.
So, in
Right.
West Africa, this is a total eclipse. And then in other areas of the Pacific, or sorry, the Atlantic Ocean and going up into northern Africa, it's a partial eclipse. But there are
Right.
other areas where it's not an eclipse at all.
Right.
So this is why there might be, I might talk about, yeah, there's going to be like a total eclipse this weekend. And you go out and you look and you're like, I see nothing. And it's like, it's
Right.
probably not visible for us. And some people may
Right.
remember in August of 2017, there was a giant solar eclipse deal. There were people who
Mhm.
drove from all over the country towards places like Oregon, Montana, Utah. Everybody was
Uh-huh.
trying to get in this umbra,
Mhm.
in this path
Mhm.
of the total eclipse.
Mhm.
Because many times, the earth is 70% covered with water. Many times these eclipses are visible, but it's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, you
Oh,
know,
wow.
where almost nobody
Right.
gets to see it. So
Right.
when
Right.
it happens directly over like our continent, everybody's like,
Uh-huh.
yes, I want to journey. I want to go there. I want to get myself into this like little total eclipse umbral area. Um, so yeah, I don't know if people remember that. It was a super big deal on the Pacific
I
coast for sure. Freeways were closed down. People were just like taking a tent and parking by the side of the road in their tent because everybody wanted to be in this little area.
I remember when I was living in Colorado, we had a I don't remember if it was a total eclipse or what it was, but it I was like, well, what's it going to look like? And we were actually, Michael and I were with my mom. We were at a restaurant. We didn't buy the safety glasses or anything because we just, we didn't think that it would be like a big not
Oh,
not a big deal,
yeah.
like, I mean, it was we were kind of like, I mean, if we see it, we see it. If we don't, we don't, well, so we were actually at a restaurant. Everybody got up, went outside. People were passing around their glasses to other people so they could look at it. It was
Oh,
so cool. And then in Cheyenne, Wyoming, a whole bunch of people like camped out and same thing. Like I remember it, and it was really cool to see. It was really, really cool to see. So
it's
I can
so
totally,
cool.
yeah,
And,
I can
and
totally understand.
if people do have an opportunity, if a
Yeah.
total eclipse is coming anywhere near you, it is so worth seeing.
Yes.
It is a very deeply spiritual experience
Mhm.
where you
Yeah.
realize how tiny you are, and like the
Right.
sun that we all rely on for light and warmth and photosynthesis for food is just gone.
Mhm.
And you can see
Yeah.
where ancient people, when an eclipse happened, before they learned the math to predict when they would happen, it was just
Mhm.
like, what is happening? The sun has
Yeah.
disappeared. This is
Yeah.
not good.
Yeah.
And likewise with the lunar eclipse, just because of the way that the light refracts
Mhm.
around, the earth kind of blocking the sun. So
Mhm.
yeah, if we look at this picture, when the moon is on the other side of the earth, then it's like
Mhm.
the earth blocks the moon. And so the moon
Mhm.
kind of like goes into the earth's shadow. And because of light refraction, it appears to be red. I don't know if anyone has
Uh-huh.
seen like the red eclipse moons. But yeah, ancient people saw that and they were like, the moon turned to blood. And even like
Wow.
in Revelation, in the Bible, it
Mhm.
talks about the moon turning to blood. And people have speculated that whatever is happening in Revelation is happening during a lunar eclipse when the moon appears to be red.
Oh, wow. That is
So
interesting.
crazy stuff.
Yes. Oh my gosh,
All
so
right.
interesting though.
All right. And so this is a photograph. I did not take this. Someone who is much more of a professional than me took this. Um, but yeah, just kind of this again, it's crazy that the moon can so easily block, like perfectly block out the sun like this, where you can just see the little ring
Right.
around it. But
Right.
again, it's just because the ratio of the diameter of the moon from the moon's distance to Earth with the diameter of the sun and the sun's distance to the Earth, one is way bigger, but it is way further away. And so we get this
Right.
gorgeous sight. Please, everybody, if you go eclipse chasing, wear the eclipse glasses. Nobody needs to look
Yeah.
at the sun and get your eyeballs burned off.
No, no. Spend the $20. It's worth it.
Spend the $20. All right. Um, we're going to talk a little bit about angles. In astrology, this is the area where you will use math the most on a day-to-day
Mm,
basis. And again, thank goodness that um, we have 360 degrees in a circle, which is a nice, easily divisible number. And we have 12 zodiac signs, which is a nice, evenly divisible number.
mhm.
You know, these angles here, 0, 60, 90, 120, 180, these would not look this nice if we were trying to divide the zodiac into like 13 signs.
Right.
um,
Right.
so again, the math gets to be super nice because the ancient people in their wisdom gave us like nice, round, evenly divisible numbers like 12.
Yeah.
Um, so you all have probably heard me say ad nauseum, oh, there's a
Mhm.
conjunction. Yeah, this is sextile
Mhm.
this. The moon is square
Right.
Mars. These all
Right.
relate to angles.
Mhm.
And they relate to the angles between two planets.
Okay.
So let me see if we have a. Um, I personally have always kind of liked this graphic. I got this from the Astrology podcast. Chris Brennan does just some amazing stuff over there. But you can
Mhm.
basically see if you start here at the top, if two
Mhm.
planets appear to be right on top of each other, like for
Mhm.
example, last week, Venus and the moon appeared to be right on top of each other. That's a conjunction.
Mhm.
Again, they're not really on top of each other. Venus is much further away than the moon. But from our
Right.
perspective on Earth, we look up and they appear to be next to each other. That's a
Right. Right.
conjunction. We
Okay.
remember that each zodiac sign is 30 degrees.
Mhm.
So we can kind of say, oh, well, when we go to our next zodiac sign and we are 1/12 of the way around the zodiac, this angle is called a semi-sextile and it's 30 degrees. We move to our next angle, sextile, 1/6 of the way around the zodiac, 60 degrees.
Okay.
Square, a quarter of the way around, 90 degrees. Trine, 1/3 of the way around the circle,
Mhm.
120 degrees. You can see all of these angles have names.
Mhm.
Um, in in Hellenistic astrology, in those
Mhm.
kind of around the Roman Empire kind of times, there were
Mhm.
certain angles they just didn't like. They felt that they were not holy enough, or they didn't like the numerology. So
Right.
So these are what are called the Ptolemaic angles, because Ptolemy basically said, these are the ones we like. We don't like angles that aren't these. Yeah, they're not holy. They're
Oh,
not
okay.
cool, special, amazing enough. So
Right.
these ones, 0, 60 degrees, 90 degrees, 120 degrees, and the opposition, which is 180
Mm-hmm.
degrees, these are the ones that were used in the 1st century AD. And you might hear these called Ptolemaic aspects or Ptolemaic
Mm-hmm.
angles. Some of these were
Mm-hmm.
viewed as being benefic and helpful. Some of these angles were viewed as being difficult and more malefic. And it's
Right.
important to remember that in that period of history, we were just kind of getting the rise of Christianity. Most things
Mm-hmm.
were sort of divided into a good bad framework. It
Right.
really wasn't a
Right.
time when there was a lot of like gray, flexible
Mm-hmm.
understanding. It was much more like good, bad, good, bad. And so it's
Right. Right.
important when we look at astrology to kind of remember we do live in a different time now where we're not
Mhm.
good, bad as much.
Right. Right.
We see more nuances and subtleties.
Right.
But so Ptolemy didn't like the 30-degree angle, so he cut out the
Mm-hmm.
semi-sextile. He cut out the quincunx, which you can see these two
Uh-huh.
quincunxes down here. So these
Right.
ones are not part of the Ptolemaic angles. But the conjunction, the sextile, the square, the trine, the opposition, and then as we go back down, we hit the trine again,
Mm-hmm.
the sextile, the
Mm-hmm.
square, the sextile, and the conjunction. These were very important in ancient astrology, and these are still the most important angles in astrology. There are some modern astrologers who are doing some honestly fascinating work around using other angles.
Oh.
So this basically divides, the zodiac into 12, right? Because we do have 12 signs. So dividing, these angles into, equal 30-degree segments kind of makes sense with our zodiac. But like Rick Levine, who is
Mm-hmm.
an astrologer, he's done some really cool work taking the 360-degree circle and dividing it into sevenths, ninths,
Oh wow.
11ths, 13ths, for those of you who still want that opacus to be a part of the zodiac. Um,
Right. Oh
Now
wow.
those degrees don't come out nice and neat. You don't get 90
Right.
degrees, you get like 57.3 degrees. Something that again, not very doable when you have to hand do a bunch of arithmetic like you did, in
Right.
the Hellenistic era. But now that we have calculators
Right.
and fancy software programs, so yeah, it's if any of these angles are interesting to you, um, yeah, Rick Levine has a really cool class on, he kind of posits that there are some witchy things, related to when you divide the zodiac in ninths or 11ths. And so there's
Oh.
there's cool work being done. And, this is one of the amazing things about astrology. We care about what happened and how this all was defined and originated in the
Right.
Hellenistic
Right.
period, and even before then in the, ancient Babylon. But
Right.
we're still learning and growing. The ancients didn't
Mm-hmm.
even know about Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto because you can't see those without a telescope. So astrology,
Right.
we continue to build on it and learn and evolve. So there are even more angles that you can play with now. But these are certainly the most classical ones. These here, the conjunction, sextile, square, trine, and opposition. And the
Right.
conjunction, sextile, and trine are viewed
Mm-hmm.
as the positive, easy, benefic angles. And the squares and the oppositions are viewed as more friction filled and challenging and difficult.
Oh.
Um,
Okay.
yes. Um, the caveat there, I guess, is that, again, thinking about the Hellenistic time in which these angles were created, um, they had so much difficulty in their life, even just like
Mhm.
getting enough food to live. And, there were all
Right.
kinds of diseases and people died in childbirth. And it was a very difficult
Right.
time. So they would latch on to the feel good angles, the
Mm-hmm.
sextile, the
Mm-hmm.
trine, the conjunction, and just say, like, yeah, this is what I want. Everything else is bad. But in our modern
Right.
world, we do see more nuance there, that of course, none of us is asking for a bunch of difficult times
Mhm.
in our lives, but it is through those
Right.
difficult times, the pain and the challenges, that we learn and grow and develop. So,
Mhm.
again, I think with modern astrology, there's less of a view of good angle, bad angle, and more like,
Right.
okay, this will be more challenging, but there will be growth
Mhm.
opportunity. This other one will
Right.
feel really nice, like drinking a mojito on the beach, but probably not much
Right.
growth opportunity. So, again, I think in our
Right.
modern world, we see a lot more nuances and subtleties, and don't see
Mhm.
things in that super binary good bad way that they did in the Hellenistic era.
Right. Right.
And when we talk about these angles, we are talking about where planets look like they are in relation to each other. So, for example, if you go out at night and you see the moon directly overhead, and then you kind of
Mhm.
go 90 degrees away and you see Mars, we would say that the
Mhm.
moon is square Mars. And it's really important to call out that these angles between planets,
Mhm.
this doesn't matter whether you are using the tropical or the sidereal zodiac. The
Oh.
planets they make angles with each other
Mhm.
regardless.
Mhm.
The Vedic astrologers might say they are in a different sign when they
Mhm.
are forming
Mhm.
that angle, but the angle
Right.
is the
Right.
angle. It is a mathematical calculation. If two planets
Huh.
are 90 degrees away, they form a square. If they are 120 degrees away, they form a trine. If they appear to be right next to each other, it is a conjunction. So that part between Vedic and Western astrology is completely the same. Again, Vedic astrologers might just say that when those planets make a conjunction, they are in a different sign than we would
Uh-huh.
say, but the angles are the
Oh.
angles.
Oh, wow.
So, and when we think about the angles between two planets, there's sort of the way Ptolemy um, looked at this was that when planets form these angles with each other, they can see each other. It's
Okay.
almost like, if you're in your house and
Mhm.
you're just standing there and you can't see your friend, and then, you kind of like
Mhm.
move to the left, and now you're in front of a window and you can see your friend outside.
Right.
Ptolemy viewed when planets hit these angles with each other, they could see each other and interact with
Mhm.
each other, and kind of
Mhm.
go out to dinner and like have some type of shared interaction, shared
Right.
energy. So when we see planets forming angles with each other, there's going
Mhm.
to be some relationship stuff between them, and we're going to see some qualities of each of them in whatever happens.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
again, the quality, the type of interaction depends on the
Mhm.
angle between them. So if it's a square between the moon and Mars, there's going to be kind of some tug of war between like our
Right.
emotions and our ambition and drive.
Mhm.
Whereas
Mhm.
if it is a trine between the moon and Mars, our emotions are going to align with our motivation. And so we're going to,
Right.
feel like we can move forward without friction.
Right.
So I don't know who put the P in Ptolemy. That's a good question because it is very, very silent.
So now there's something interesting too, because I was thinking about my chart as you were talking, and I know you had mentioned to me before, my sun and moon do not see each other.
Yeah,
If,
that
did I
this is
phrase?
why.
So so they
Yes.
don't see each other. So there are going to be those times too where this isn't happening and they're just hanging out where they are. So
Well, so
that's interesting.
your sun and moon, Christy, form a quincunx with each other. You see
Okay.
this quincunx angle down here, the five
Yes. Oh, yeah,
twelfths
yeah,
the
yeah.
way around.
Mhm.
And from
Uh-huh.
from the Hellenistic astrology period, they didn't count the quincunx or the
Oh, okay.
semi-sextile. And so they said when planets were at those angles, they could not see each other. And that is why your sun and moon can't see each other.
Oh. Okay. Okay. Very cool. I always,
Yes.
I mean, well, and I'm kind of odd anyway. I kind of like that my sun and moon don't see each other. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
you keep each other in the dark. We don't know what we're doing.
Well, and I think this is where some of the modern astrologers who are doing more with angles, like there are modern astrologers who do a ton with quincunxes and semi-sextiles, for example.
Right.
And,
Right.
I do feel like as human consciousness evolves, astrology evolves
Mhm.
along with it. So there's kind of
Right.
this sense of, okay, in the Hellenistic era, they were just trying to stay alive and like not die in childbirth, or die in war.
Right.
Like, yeah,
Right.
let's just take a couple of nice angles, like the
Mhm.
120, the conjunction, call it good. But we are in
Right.
a time when human consciousness has evolved. We have things like therapy, shadow work to kind of help us work
Yeah.
through. People in that time did not have that luxury. Again, they were trying to
Right.
survive. And
Right.
now human consciousness has evolved to a point where we can be digging deeper within ourselves. And so now it's time to start pulling some of these other tools out of the toolbox. It's the time
Mhm.
of the quincunxes and the semi-sextiles and some of these
Right.
other angles that are, yeah, they're not about survival. There's nuance.
Right.
And, as you said, you kind of like that maybe your sun and your moon don't see each other. They keep each other in the dark
Right.
a little bit. It's like, yeah,
Right.
there's
Right.
nuance to that. It's interesting. It's not
Yeah.
straightforward. There's subtlety to
Yeah.
it. And we are
Right.
in an age where, yeah, we're beyond the basics. We've got
Mhm.
3 new
Mhm.
planets since the Hellenistic era and all kinds of new
Yeah.
angles and techniques and,
Right.
yeah.
I
Okay,
love it.
just a little bit more, friends. How's everybody doing? I feel like
I'm
I need to
doing
do a
good.
quick check. Okay, we're
Ben says
doing
I
good?
kind of like that. He's such a quincunx. Quincunx has a nice ring to it.
I mean, it does. It does have a really nice ring to it. All right. So I want to talk about 2 more things, one for sure. And if I'm starting to lose
Okay.
people after this one, I'll cut out the last one and we can do that another time. Okay.
Okay. No, I'm good.
Let's talk about retrogrades.
Let's do that. This is a big
Let's
one.
do that because, so far we've talked about the ecliptic and we're like, yeah,
Mhm.
all the planets and the sun, except for the moon, but all the planets and the sun just nicely go around this ecliptic. Da, 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 da. So what is up with retrogrades? All
Right.
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 So the important first thing to realize, the planets never actually turn around and go backwards.
Mhm.
They only appear to from the Earth. So if you do go outside during a Mercury retrograde and, like the week leading up to a Mercury retrograde and then the week during the Mercury retrograde, you will see in the sky every night Mercury gets a little further along. And then at some point, Mercury stops. Mercury
Mhm.
turns around and moves backward. You can see that in the sky.
Right. Right.
But Mercury itself is not moving backwards. Mercury is moving
Mhm.
forward, the same as Mercury always does.
Right.
Um, I am going to try to play this animation, and we're going to
Okay.
see if anybody can see it or not. Can people see this? Maybe not. Let me share this.
Oh, there we go.
Yes. Okay. I wonder is
Right.
there a way to, oh, I want to make that go away. Maybe not. Okay. So let's look at the blue Earth and the red
Mhm.
Mars.
Okay.
And this is pretty accurate from like, where, like how close their orbits are. Mars's orbit is quite close to Earth's.
Right.
So I want people to notice a couple things. Um, there's this view from Earth box down here on the
Mhm.
right.
Mhm.
Notice that and watch how Mars and the Earth, this little blue and red ball, interact with each other and how that relates to the view from Earth. So we enter this green box. Now we can see
Mhm.
Mars, right? I'm just going to pause for a
Mhm.
second. So if we're on Earth, oh yeah, there's Mars. And we can see in the
Mhm.
view from Earth, yep, we see Mars. Mars is moving.
Mhm.
Now the Earth moves faster than Mars. So
Okay.
the Earth is catching up to Mars. Yes. Do people agree with
Mhm.
that? The Earth is
Mhm.
moving
Mhm.
faster than Mars, which that's true of all of the planets. The closer you are to the sun, the faster you're moving. Because if you aren't
Mhm.
moving faster, you get sucked into the sun and,
Right.
explode because gravity.
Right.
So
Right.
the closer you are towards the sun, you better be moving fast or you're going to get sucked in. Okay, so let's keep looking. So the
Okay.
Earth is starting to pass Mars. In this view
Okay.
from Earth, Mars now appears to be moving backward. Is
Right.
Mars
Right.
actually moving backward?
Yeah. Nope.
No. And this is retrograde motion. This is the same thing as
Uh-huh.
if you are on the freeway and
Mm-hmm.
there's this car that's just going so slow, like 45 miles an hour in the right
Uh-huh.
lane. And you're like, I can't be going 45 miles on the interstate. I got places to go and things to do. And so you zip
Right.
past them at 90. If
Uh-huh.
someone is in your car looking out the passenger side window as you pass
Uh-huh.
them, it looks like they're moving backwards and they're now
Right.
moving way back into your rearview mirror, but they are
Right. Right.
not
Right.
moving backwards. You're just
Right.
moving faster than they are and
Faster
you
than
passed them. So, yeah, you can kind of see them coming up. Oh, then there they go. They're moving backwards.
right.
No, you're
Right.
just moving forwards faster.
Right.
So
Oh, I
far, so
love that.
good.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
we can
And Millie says,
see
cool
that
to
as
see it.
the Earth, oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah. No, no. It's good. It's good.
Yeah, okay, cool, cool. I know this is tricky. Okay,
No.
now let's watch where the Earth is. So the Earth is kind of rounding its orbit,
Mm-hmm.
and we can still see Mars, but again, Mars is still behind us because we're still moving
Right.
faster than Mars.
Mm-hmm.
But now the Earth makes its turn in its orbit, and
Mm-hmm.
Mars is starting to come around the other way. And then Mars will start to look like it goes direct again. So I'm going to play this one more time. If people have questions or any of this is like really confusing, please
Uh-huh.
shout out. And so just to recap, we've got the blue Earth, we've got the red Mars, this green box
Mm-hmm.
here, this
Mm-hmm.
corresponds to the view from Earth. So
Right.
when we see the Earth, or when we see Mars show up in the view from Earth, it's because Mars is in this green box over here on the
Mm-hmm.
left. All right. So we have the Earth, faster, faster, faster. It's gaining, it's gaining,
Right.
it's gaining,
Right.
it's almost crossing. So close. Oh, and now we're starting to pass it, and Mars is starting to go retrograde. Now,
Right.
when you look at this, I
Uh-huh.
don't know if anybody has noticed this before, but Mars and other planets, but it's most visible with Mars. Mars is at its absolute brightest when it is retrograde. And this is
Mm.
why. Look how close the Earth and Mars are when Mars is retrograde,
Right.
because the Earth is literally
Oh,
passing right by Mars.
right.
Whereas,
Right.
the rest of the time when Mars is direct, the Earth might be on the whole other side of its orbit
Mm-hmm.
from Mars. Mars is much further away. And Mars is
Mm-hmm.
retrograde now, which I think everybody knows. Mars
Mm-hmm.
is retrograde now. So if you go out, around 11 p.m., midnight, you can see Mars clearly.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big red star towards the top of the
Right.
sky. And
Right.
again, when Mars is direct, it is not that bright. But we can see
Mm-hmm.
from this visual that when Mars is retrograde, it's as close as it ever gets to the Earth. Do
Right.
people see this? Super close
Yeah.
together. And that's why Mars is
Yeah.
so bright during retrogrades.
This is so cool. It's good to see it visually. I think who
Yes.
Millie said I'm a visual learner. It's really cool to be able to see what it's doing. It makes
Yes.
it make a lot more sense. That's awesome.
And just so people know, this is a real retrograde. This is from February
Hmm.
10th, 2021. So we did
Hmm.
get a Mars retrograde towards like the last part of 2020 into 2021. And
Hmm.
it was actually
Hmm.
Mars, I think it was Mars retrograde in Gemini, if I'm remembering correctly. So this
Mm.
all appeared to be in front of Gemini if you use the
Right.
sidereal zodiac, which we don't. But
Right. Right.
yes, this happened. And then I
Oh, cool.
have one of Mercury as well. And the only reason I want to share this one as well
Hmm.
is because Mars is an outer planet. It's further outside of of Earth's orbit, whereas Mercury and Venus are inside the Earth's orbit. So I want to just let people see what that looks like. Let me mute this. This and this is, you know, it's an astronomy thing. So it's like, you know, from a scientific perspective, retrograde motions don't mean anything in your life, you know. So this is, you know, but I think, you know, the other thing this underscores is that this is the science. Like, this is what is happening in the sky. And we can see what this is drawing out from the perspective of the Earth as we look at Mercury.
That is so cool.
Yeah, and Mercury retrogrades 3 times a year. And we can basically see that as the Earth creates its cycle, about every 120 degrees, about every third of the zodiac, Mercury retrogrades. But again, Mercury is never moving backwards. This is just in relation to Earth. We appear to see Mercury moving backwards. Okay. Let me do that. Okay. Okay, so why does all the funky stuff happen during? Well, so astronomers will tell you that retrogrades don't mean anything. Astrologers like myself will tell you, no, retrogrades have meaning. You know, the whole premise of astrology is that it's not like astrology only makes sense from our perspective on Earth. You know, the whole like, oh, the sun is in Gemini, I can see it in front of Gemini. That only makes sense if you're on Earth. If you are on any other planet, it looks like the sun is in front of something different. So, yes, from our perspective, from an astrological, not astronomical perspective, we do believe that Mercury retrograde means something and Mars retrograde means something. Every retrograde means something.
Right.
Okay. One other thing to note, so we talked about how when an outer planet is retrograde, it is as close to the Earth as it gets. We saw that with Mars, and that it's at its brightest in the night sky when it's retrograde. When an outer planet is retrograde, it is also opposite to the sun in the astrological chart. And let me really quickly show why this is. Let's rewind to the point where yeah, this is roughly where it starts going retrograde. Can we see where the sun is? And where Mars is? When Mars goes retrograde, the Earth is right in between the sun and Mars, because the Earth is passing Mars, going between the sun and Mars. So if you look at like an astrology chart, if Mars is at the top of the chart, the sun will be at the bottom of the chart. They will be the sun and Mars, or the sun and any outer planet, Jupiter retrograde, you know, Saturn retrograde, Pluto retrograde. They will be at opposite sides of the chart you are looking at, because they are at opposite sides of the sky from our perspective on Earth.
Oh.
Does this make sense to people?
Yes. This is so cool. I'm going to let you keep talking for a second. I got to go turn my heat on because it's getting a little chilly.
Okay. How are we feeling? We can tackle one more math sciencey topic, or we can call it good. I know we've been going for 2 hours, so if people are toast, I respect that. If you want to keep going, I respect that too. Ben is doing good. Ben, I had a feeling you would be doing good. Anybody else want to weigh in? All right, we will go for it. And if people just need to kind of zone out, peace out, yeah, I respect that. Okay, and this I'm kind of just pointing out, you know, we just talked about that late 2020 and early 2021 Mars retrograde that we just saw in the YouTube video. This is what the astrological chart looked like for that time in late 2020. And we see how the sun is opposite Mars. That's because the Earth is in the middle, passing Mars. So I'm just kind of trying to show the connection between the night sky and how this looks in a chart.
Okay. And
Okay.
yeah, I'm good to keep going.
You're good?
I
All
just
right.
needed to,
All right.
yes. I just needed to turn the heat on. It sometimes it will blow cold air, so I have to let it rest a little bit in between. And now it's starting to cool off enough that I was like, I need to warm it up in here.
Yes.
Um,
Perfect.
yes, yeah, let's keep going.
All
Millie says
right.
my ADD self can hyper focus.
All right. I love that everybody's willing to hang in here even after 2 hours. Okay. So
Yes.
this last one I want to talk about. I just want everyone to know that this is a deep mine of math and
Yeah.
you know, some of the math we've been doing is a little bit more, 360 divided by 12. I can do that. The house
Right.
systems, some of this stuff, people gets gnarly, but I'm keeping this super high level.
Uh-huh.
And there are also, oh, friends, there are so many astrological house systems. 10 or 12 that are coming to mind just for Western astrology. Jyotish Vedic have their own set of house systems as well.
Mm-hmm.
So houses are a solely mathematical construct within astrology. Everything else
Oh.
we've talked about so far, I've showed you pictures, right? And it's like, hey, look, here's the Earth, here's the moon, here's
Right.
Saturn, right? The night
Right.
sky, we love it.
Right.
Astrological house systems, people made this up.
Okay.
Everything else in astrology has a super astronomical
Mm-hmm.
thing associated with it. Oh, it's an
Mm-hmm.
eclipse. Oh, yeah, we see Mars going retrograde. There's a physical component to it. That is not
Right.
true of the house systems. Okay.
Okay.
The idea of the house systems started a very long time ago. In some ways, the house systems almost, I don't want to say they exactly predated the zodiac, but way back in ancient Egypt, the Egyptians believed that certain positions in the sky meant
Mm-hmm.
certain areas of life.
Okay.
So, for example, when the sun is right overhead at high noon, they viewed that as being a very public time because that's
Mm-hmm.
probably when you're out in the world, you're doing commerce, you're doing business. At midnight, that's a more private time. You're probably at home, you're probably in bed.
Right.
You're probably only with people who you are very intimate with.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of the houses rose up that, like, where the sun is in the sky, it does
Mm-hmm.
mean different things. And
Mm-hmm.
again, even intuitively as modern humans, it does make sense to us that we do different stuff at noon
Right.
versus midnight. Most of
Right.
us, yes, some
Right.
of us are on third shift schedules or whatever. But at noon, we're probably at work. The
Yeah.
majority of people at work.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
the right overhead, that corresponds to the 10th house, which is the house of work and career.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth house is way opposite the 10th house at the bottom of the chart, very deep underneath. That corresponds with midnight.
Mm-hmm.
And what are we doing at midnight? We're probably asleep. We're probably doing private things. We're not out there doing public things. So the fourth
Right.
house in astrology, which represents that midnight time period, that represents our home, our
Mm-hmm.
family, because that's probably what we're doing around midnight.
Right.
So houses kind of evolved from this idea that, like, our day has subsections in it and we do different
Mm-hmm.
things at different times. And
Right.
so far, we've talked about how the Earth revolves around the sun. We talked about
Mm-hmm.
that, and how as the Earth moves in its orbit around the sun appears to be behind different zodiac or in front of different zodiac signs. But the Earth
Mhm.
also
Mhm.
twirls on its axis. And we talked about this. We talked about how it twirls, and it twirls a little bit like a wobbly top. And we get the precession of the equinoxes, and we get the age of Aquarius. So, but the Earth moves on its axis. What this means is that we get a sunrise every day. If the Earth did not turn on its axis, we would not turn away from the sun. You know, half of the Earth would always be facing the sun, and the other half would always not be facing the sun. And interestingly, the moon is like this. So,
Uh-huh.
you know, there's the whole concept of the far side of the moon. One
Mhm.
side of the moon is what we always see in the sky.
Right.
We humans.
Right. Right.
The
Right.
Earth is not like that.
Mhm.
We rotate around our axis. And as we do that, we basically turn towards the sun. Oh, it's sunrise. And then the day goes by.
Right.
Oh, it's sunset. And now we're like, we've
Right.
rotated away from the sun. And now we're in the darkness of space.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So far, so good, everybody. If
Mhm.
people have
Mhm.
questions or are not clear, please comment. I
Right.
will
Right.
try to
No,
clear. Okay.
you're doing great. Yeah. It's
Okay.
making sense.
Okay. Okay. So, every 24 hours, approximately, the Earth makes one rotation.
Mhm.
This should feel pretty intuitive to all of us because that's one of our days. That is
Right.
literally what defines our day. One sunrise to
Mhm.
the next sunrise. That's one
Mhm.
day. That's one 24-hour period. That is one rotation of the Earth. So the Earth
Mhm.
rotates on its axis once every 24 hours.
Mhm.
What does this mean? Well, this means if it's midnight and I
Mhm.
stare at the eastern horizon, at some point the sun is going to come up. And I
Right.
keep staring and I see the sun go up and it becomes noon and the sun goes down. And apparently I have nothing to do because I'm just still sitting there and watching it, watching it, watching it. And now it gets dark. And now all the stars come out. And oh, there's Orion and there's the Little Dipper. And then,
Uh-huh.
24 hours later, the sun comes up again. And then the
Mhm.
sun moves up towards the sky and then it goes down. And then it's
Mhm.
dark again. And I can say, oh, yeah, there's Orion again. There's the Little Dipper.
Mhm.
This rotation of the Earth on its axis is what creates
Mhm.
houses. So
Okay.
I'm saying this slow because this is not true of zodiac signs. So the sun right now is in
Mhm.
Aquarius.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter whether it is day or night. It
Right.
does not
Okay.
matter. If you go outside and you're using the sidereal zodiac, the sun is in front of the constellation of Aquarius.
Right. Right.
So, zodiac signs not affected by the 24-hour spin of the Earth on
Mhm.
its axis.
Mhm.
The houses are 100% affected by the 24-hour spin on its axis. The houses are defined by the 24-hour spin on the Earth's axis. So let
Okay.
me go back to this chart and ignore the circled part right now, because before I was trying to point out Mars opposite the sun. We don't care about that right now. This, just pretend it's a normal birth chart, normal chart of the sky. This AS over here on the
Mhm.
left, this marks the ascendant. This is the
Mhm.
part rising over the eastern
Mhm.
horizon as the Earth
Mhm.
spins.
Mhm.
When the sun hits this ascendant point, the sun rises. Right
Mhm.
now, it's more like noon, right? Because the sun is way up here in the top of the sky. The sun is not near the
Right.
ascendant. The sun has already risen. If the sun were down here, it would be closer to midnight.
Right.
But in
Okay.
the course of 24 hours, um, this whole cycle of the zodiac turns once. Because, and again, the zodiac signs aren't moving. The sun is
Right.
not moving out of Aquarius. The sun is still in Aquarius, but
Right.
we are moving. We, in one 24-hour time period, we cycle once. So throughout the day, as the minutes go by, the hours go by, this ascendant moves. In 24 hours, this ascendant has moved through all of the zodiac signs and is back to another
Right.
sunrise.
Right.
Are we good so far?
Yeah. So
Okay.
this is why you can have a bunch of people born in Aquarius, but none of us have the same houses.
Rising
Because
sign. Yes, yes,
if it
yes,
was
yes.
dependent on that, we would all have the same houses. So our birth charts wouldn't be personal. So all of this stuff wouldn't matter, because if you and I were both Tauruses, we would have the exact same placements and we would all be the same
Correct.
people, right?
Correct. Yes, that
Okay.
is exactly correct, Christy. So, for example, if someone is born on the exact same day as you, but 12
Mm-hmm.
hours different, your
Mm-hmm.
ascendants will be opposite each other. Your first
Right.
house might be here in Aquarius. 12 hours later, their first
Mm-hmm.
house is going to be in Leo. And that
Right.
shifts all of the houses because
Right. Okay.
the ancient people, they thought sunrise was an incredibly special time. It was
Mm-hmm.
basically, and if you look way back at the ancient Egyptians, they worshiped the sun god Ra, and they believed Ra
Right.
basically disappeared over the horizon, like like they have a whole mythology. Gosh, I probably should have looked this up before I joined the call, but here we are. But there was basically the idea that Ra got carried by a giant scarab beetle, like under the earth, and you basically got renewed and reborn in the morning at sunrise.
Right.
And, so they viewed sunrise as this time of rebirth. The sun is
Mm-hmm.
back. It didn't leave us forever. The sun came
Right.
back.
Right. Right.
This is very
Right.
exciting. I know we take this for granted in modern,
Right.
world,
Well, they
but
didn't
they,
know.
yeah, they were still very excited by that. For all they know, the sun
Right.
is a god who just decides to leave one day and doesn't come back up
Right.
in the morning.
Right.
So, um, they viewed the sunrise time as very special, and
Mm-hmm.
they called it kind of the hour marker. And so
Oh.
whatever was rising over the eastern horizon, like that was important. That was what was rising up and coming and being reborn. And you basically can track this into, this is why the ascendant slash rising sign slash first
Mm-hmm.
house is all very, very important in astrology, because it's the place that things are born from, is that eastern
Right.
horizon.
Oh.
And Millie, yes, if you and someone share the same rising sign, the houses will be the same for both of you, with a slight caveat. There are multiple house systems. So for some house systems, you and your friend, if you have the same rising sign, you will have exactly the same house system. For other house systems where the math gets a little weirder, you might have slightly different houses, but they would still be very close.
Mm.
Okay.
That is so cool.
So if we were going to talk about we were going to talk about going from our house to the grocery store. We could
Okay.
describe it with time, right? We could say, well, it takes about 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Or we could say, well, it's 3 miles. So do people
Mm-hmm.
have a perspective on which one is right or more helpful or more descriptive? And if
Mm-hmm.
anyone has thoughts,
Right.
please drop them in the comments. The interest.
See,
Yeah.
I always say minutes. I'm like, it takes 15 minutes. Mostly because I'm really awful at miles. I'm like, well, how many miles? What? How long does it take me to drive there?
Well, and what's really, yeah, and Ben's like uses distance because of mapping. Totally. What's
Right.
interesting is that neither one of these are wrong. They're both descriptive. So, for
Right.
example, if we take the 3
Right.
miles, if it's 3 miles in Montana versus 3 miles in Manhattan, that's going to be a really different
Yes.
looking 3 miles, even though technically it's exactly the same,
Yeah.
right? Likewise, if
Right.
it's 15 minutes in Manhattan versus 15 minutes in Montana, pretty different 15 minutes.
Right.
But they're
Right.
both
Right.
descriptive but in different ways. And if we think about our world, like we live in a time-space continuum, right? We have space, three-dimensional space, and we have time that we are all moving through. We're all kind of moving from birth towards death. You know, time is an axis. And the house systems, when you're deciding how to divide up the sky, you know, you decide these basic things where you're like, well, overhead, when the sun is overhead, that's a very public time. We're going to call that the career area. The part at the very bottom of the chart, yeah, that seems like private life. We're going to call that like home and family. And they kind of had ideas for these areas around the chart. But when they came to actually deciding how to divide up the sky, there aren't any stars or constellations that correspond with any of this, people. No stars, no zodiac signs. These are just kind of areas, right? Like, yeah, when the sun's kind of up there, I'm probably at work. When the sun's kind of on the other side of the earth, I'm probably asleep. And so, so the idea is that people had to kind of define the houses and create borders and boundaries for like, well, okay, what part up there is career versus what part is like community, groups, events, which is next to the house of career. They had to draw these borders. So one fundamental thing with the house systems is they either all index on distance or time. Everyone indexes on one of those two things, but they can't do both. Sort of similarly to the reason why we can't do both the indexing off of the constellations and also the equinoxes and solstices. Because again, if we think about this example of like Manhattan and Montana, you can't say, oh, it's 3 miles and it's going to take 15 minutes. No, you can't say both of those. It depends on where you are. So you have to pick one or the other. Okay. So there are many different types of house systems, like 10 in Western astrology that I'm thinking of right now. There's more than that, though. There's probably more like 20, maybe even more, but they start to get more and more esoteric. There are a few main used ones. There are 2 that are extremely used in modern Western astrology. So I'm going to talk about both of those. One is time-based and one is distance space-based, but be aware there are many other house systems that use space or use distance, but I'm going to do 2 of the most common. Okay, here we are. This is a little person. This is us. The midheaven, noon, you know, the high noon is right overhead. The opposite side of the earth is directly below our feet. We have the east horizon. We have the west horizon. Some people may immediately yell at me and say, shouldn't east be on the right and west be on the left? And the answer is no, because we are looking at the earth from outside of the earth. If we were in this person's perspective, looking out at us, yes, east is on our right, but we are outside of the earth looking in. So the Placidus system, this was incredibly used in the 20th century. This one requires more math, which is probably a reason why it wasn't developed back in the Hellenistic time, because they did not have calculators or math programs. The way the Placidus system works is they take a point as it crosses the sunrise line, the eastern horizon, and they measure how much time it takes to get to the highest point in the sky. So if we take the sun, for example, it could be any point. It could be a star, it could be a planet, but we'll just take the sun because that's really visible for all of us. We go from sunrise and we start our stopwatch. And time goes by and the sun rises and it gets to here, the highest point it's going to get in the sky. And then we press stop on our stopwatch.
Mhm.
Will the sun be exactly overhead? Will it be shining right down on the top of our head? Probably not.
Mhm.
Not unless we live at the equator. And the sun,
Okay.
you know, we have that whole ecliptic equator problem where the ecliptic and the equator aren't even exactly the same line.
Right.
But the short answer is
Right.
probably not. If you live in the northern hemisphere,
Okay.
yes, the sun roughly rises in the east and sets in the west. But if you face
Mhm.
south, you still see it move in the south. There's an old
Right.
thing that like
Right.
moss grows on the north side of trees. That's because the sun does
Uh-huh.
not shine on the north side of trees in the northern hemisphere because the sun is roughly coming from the equator ecliptic. And if you're in the northern hemisphere, it's coming
Mhm.
from the south. Are we tracking
Okay.
sort of?
Yeah.
Are we?
Yeah.
So
No,
the
I'm with
sun will
you.
not
I'm with
be
you.
shining onto the tip top of our head unless we actually are at the intersection of
Mhm.
the ecliptic and the equator. For most of us,
Right.
the sun will
Okay.
reach the highest point in the sky, but that will still be south of us if we're in the northern hemisphere, or
Okay.
north of us if we're in the southern hemisphere. Okay, now, depending on the time of year, this time changes.
Mhm.
If I measure this
Mhm.
right now, there are more
Mhm.
hours of nighttime than daylight. So sunrise
Okay.
to the sun reaching its highest point, like the sun will be above the horizon for less than 12 hours a day. When we get to the summer, where we get these awesome, really long days, then this part
Right.
under the horizon, that's going to be less time. There are fewer hours of darkness, way more hours of light. So think
Okay.
about this as a time circle, not a distance circle. Distance wise, this is 360 degrees, like, like, you know, these are all equal distances. Every single one of these is equal distances.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
because we're
Mhm.
measuring from like sunrise to sunset, that time
Mhm.
changes depending on the time of year. And it depends on where you are. The closer you are to the equator, the closer this is to actually being equal distances as well. If you live up in Norway or Greenland,
Mhm.
this might be really skewed. You know, like in Alaska, for example, during
Right.
parts of the year, it might be light almost
Right.
all the time. There might only be a couple hours of darkness. You have
Right.
to divide this whole bottom part by just a couple hours of darkness,
Right. Okay.
right?
Okay.
So, what many of you
Okay.
will see if you look at charts, if you generate them using the Placidus system, there are some teeny tiny houses and there are some giant houses. If you have noticed this, this is why. If you're ever like, how come my second house is like a sliver and my fourth house is like ginormous?
Right.
It's because you are
Mhm.
either born near a solstice where the day and night are very unequal, or you're born very far north or very far south, which skews how far you are from the ecliptic equator. So
Okay.
Placidus is basically defined taking the time from sunrise to sunset and then roughly dividing that
Mhm.
into 6 houses, 6 equal houses based on, I mean, it's not even quite, how deep do I want to go? I guess I'm in it. So I'm just going to like go the rest of the way because it's only a little bit further and then I'm going to let you people rest. Placidus is actually what's called a quadrant house system. So it's not quite as simple as measuring from sunrise to sunset and then doing an equal 6 houses there and then, you know, an equal 6 houses on the
Mhm.
bottom side. It's a quadrant system. Quad means 4. So we actually measure the
Mhm.
amount of time it would take the sun to go from sunrise to its highest point, take that time, divide it by
Mhm.
3. Each one of those is a house cusp. Then from the sun at its highest point to sunset, we would record that time. We would divide it equally by 3. That's our second set of house cusps for the 7th, 8th, and 9th houses. And we would do that for all 4 quadrants, where this is one quadrant, sunrise to sun at its highest point. This is one quadrant, sun at its highest point to the western horizon, sunset. Then sunset to the sun is at the opposite side of the earth. And then sun is at the opposite side of the earth, back to sunrise. So it's called a quadrant house system because you do those 4 time measurements and then you evenly divide those 4 quadrants into 3 equal sections within each quadrant. But you typically wind up with some houses being very big, some houses being very small. Okay. If there are questions, and Placidus is rough. There's a reason this was not invented in the Hellenistic period. Nobody wanted to do this kind of math in the Hellenistic period. There are other house systems which are based on space rather than time. Those are a lot easier to comprehend. So one that has gained a lot of popularity over the last decade or so because of astrologers like Chris Brennan and Austin Coppock is whole sign. And whole sign is 100% distance based. So you take the sun, it moves all the way around in 24 hours. You divide up the whole space that it moves by 12, and you say, here you go. Here are your 12 houses. And so, you know, if the sun is rising in Gemini, for example, you basically say, okay, first 30 degrees, Gemini, second 30 degrees, Cancer, next 30 degrees, Leo. And you just walk around the zodiac like that. This is very easy to calculate. You really only need to know what your rising sign is. And from there, it's just like, oh, the next 30 degrees is this, the next 30 degrees, and you have to calculate very little. This was used almost exclusively in the Hellenistic tradition, again, probably because it was really easy to calculate.
Right.
Okay. Hopefully people are doing okay so far. So this is, 100% super space-based. Okay. Let me go back here just really quick while I talk a little bit about house systems. The thing about house systems, if you are new to astrology, don't start here because this is trickier. You know, as we talked about, there's no physics, astronomy equivalent to any of this. When you do get into house systems, this is this incredibly controversial topic with astrologers. There are astrologers who will this is the hill they want to die on, is like, my house system is the best. You know, this is, and the truth is, I think there is a lot of value to all of the house systems in different ways. So for example, when I am doing timing techniques, I tend to use Placidus because it is a time-based system that divides the sky by time slices. If I'm doing more of a technique like looking at a birth chart or something that's, it doesn't have a timing aspect to it. I'm not trying to see how things move and change. I'm just trying to look at things statically. I tend to gravitate towards things like whole sign that are space-based. Now, this is just me. You know, some astrologers, they will use one house system all the time, and they will get into constant arguments with other astrologers about, you know, how good their house system is. Friends, please remain open-minded. I have gone to amazing astrologers and read books and taken courses from astrologers who use these different house systems, and they're all great. And they all work. I do feel like some work better than others depending on the application. So if you just want to take away a high level thing, if you're doing something with time, like, I mean, these are more advanced things, but like zodiacal releasing, perfections, things like that, that are timing techniques, I would move towards Placidus. If you're doing, perfections, you actually kind of have to use whole sign because it was developed using whole sign. But in general, if I'm doing timing things, I will try to be using Placidus. If I'm trying to be doing more static things, evaluating a static chart, I'll use space-based. But again, just so everybody knows, this is a very controversial topic with astrologers. This is like denominations is for religion. It's kind of like
Oh
everybody's got
boy.
their favorite. And I have seen people just
Right.
even the
Right.
nicest people get so worked up about this. Okay,
Oh my
let me
goodness.
wrap
So
up. Oh,
now
yeah,
I have,
yeah.
I just have a question. Um, so you have read my birth chart just as it was, and then this last reading that I did with you was really super in depth. So did you do the whole thing, the whole house system when you read my chart initially, and then you did the Placidus when you read the other because you were looking at the timing and the transits? Is
That's a
that how
great
that
question.
worked?
And yes, that is pretty much how that worked. So when I read your birth chart the first time,
Okay.
I used whole sign exclusively. When I read it more recently, I actually
Uh-huh.
used both. And the reason is
Okay.
because your birth chart was still an important part of the equation. Yes, I am looking at things that are
Mm-hmm.
changing and timing that is changing, but the
Right.
foundation of all of it is your
Right.
birth chart. So there's a static
Gotcha.
component. The time you were born does not change, but then some of the more advanced things we were looking at, the time totally changed. Oh, this is coming in March.
Right.
This is coming in
Right.
May. And so, yeah,
Right.
frequently what I
Okay.
will do before the more in-depth readings is I will actually look at the chart using multiple house systems. So I can basically see
Mm.
and
Okay.
get a sense for like, oh, you know what? All three of the house systems I use frequently have this planet in the same house doing the same thing. Okay, that's
Right.
probably for
Right.
sure. Versus if it changes greatly, if a
Okay.
particular planet or something changes greatly between house systems, I might be like, huh, okay, there might be a little more flexibility, changeability there. The ancients said if you see an indication of something once in the chart, it's possible. If you see an indication of something twice in the
Mhm.
chart, it's probable. If you see it 3 times, it's certain. And
Mhm.
I view house systems
Right.
similarly, where if it's the same in all 3 house systems I use, I'm going to be like, okay, it's probably just going to happen that way versus, yeah, maybe more
Right.
flexibility if there are more differences between the house systems. Okay,
Okay.
friends, I am just going
Okay.
to remind everybody what we learned. So we talked about how the orderliness of the zodiac was created from this huge mass of unordered stars. We talked about the difference between the
Mhm.
tropical zodiac, that's solstice equinox based, and the sidereal zodiac, where they fix on the stars instead of the solstices. We talked about what the moon nodes are, how they're caused by the tilt of the moon's orbit with respect to the ecliptic. We talked about how when the moon,
Mhm.
when the at those places where the moon nodes intersect the moon orbit and the ecliptic, we get eclipses when the sun and moon move over those. We talked about some
Mhm.
common angles in astrology, the ones that are more benefic and
Mhm.
viewed historically as more malefic. We talked about retrograde motion of planets, and we did an intro to the way house systems are calculated. Any questions, people? I am so in awe of anybody who stuck with us this long because this has been a lot.
We've had most of the people have stuck with us. There's only been a couple people
That is
drop off.
insane. I feel like I
The
would have dropped
number
off.
has
I would have
not
been like,
changed.
this is too many hours.
It's amazing though, because it's so there's so much good information. Like, it makes everything else make sense. And I love that you said if you're starting with astrology, don't start with the houses. Understand the planets,
Yeah.
understand what that looks like. Then when you get into the others, it makes sense. Um, this was just amazing. I mean, I did not know like most of what you talked about. It was all new information. I am definitely going to get my journal and go back and listen to this again and write it all down again, because it's such good information, and this is that foundation of, it's really easy to be like, oh, my sun's in Aquarius and my moon is in Cancer, and it means this, but it means so much more
Yeah.
than just this. And guys, I'm here to tell you the last reading that Karina did for me, it made everything make so much more sense. And I've had what 3 or 4 readings from you. This last one, I was like,
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
we
And
went way in depth,
my
but yeah.
we did, and I loved it. And there was one thing she's like, how you're always saying you're swordsy. She's like, you've got the heart of Scorpio here,
Yeah.
and so you're really a fighter. And like Michael was driving down the road, and he's like, great.
Yeah, and that, Christy, for example,
And I was
that
like,
heart of the scorpion, we were getting into some of the fixed stars. You know how I told everybody, I said, we
right,
mostly don't do anything with the fixed stars. We care about the planets.
right,
Well,
right,
you
right,
can actually do a lot with the fixed stars, and they are incredibly interesting. But again, it's like
right.
astrology has so many layers. I mean, I've been studying my chart, of
Yeah,
course, for years, and you never reach the bottom. There
right,
are thousands of different techniques and
right,
interpretations and calculations, and yeah, it's just, and the sky keeps changing, so the transits keep changing. And yes,
right.
Dawn, thank you for your honesty. Your brain started melting. Yes, and I think this is also an episode that is perfect if you reach a point where you're like, I needed to peace out. You can always come back when your brain
Right,
feels fresh and you're like, I do kind of want to know how eclipses work. I just was a little overwhelmed that day.
right,
So this is a good one to review if you
right.
kind of forget how something worked or you just couldn't take it in all at once.
Right. No, I think it was great. And I love it because it shows the adaptability of, okay, so we start here, basic planetary placement is la 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 la. And then as you get to know the person more, like as you got to know me more, you're like, okay, this is what's going to matter to Christy.
Yeah.
This is what she needs to know. Because guys, it wasn't just like, okay, in June it's this, and then in July it's this. She's like, okay, well, there's death and Persephone and Panacea and Chiron.
Yeah, we did the asteroids
So
with
here's
you
your
too. Yeah,
helmet.
we didn't even talk about the asteroids today, but yes. Yeah, there's so,
Right.
yeah,
But
there's no end. People, the skies, the universe, it's
yeah,
vast, and I'm not sure we're even meant to really find the end of it. All of our life is kind of a continuous journey and learning and growth, and it's amazing that our charts can keep up with that, and they are kind
yeah,
of equally endless and
yes.
boundless.
Right. And I'm going to go back and listen to it too. And I'm going to put some timestamps
That would,
in the
yeah, that would be
comments.
so
So if
smart.
you need to go back and be like, okay, now I just wanted to check out eclipses. Where was that at? But this was I think for me, and I've very surface level studied astrology, very 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 surface level, guys. But this made it make so much more sense. And when you can grasp this, then when we talk about the retrogrades and Aries energy and Pisces energy and everything, you don't have to have it explained in such a way because you're like, I got it. Okay, I remember it's this and it looks like that. And then it's kind of like, well, for me, it's like once you get it, you've always
Yeah.
got it. And then you're like, okay, cool. I remember what that was.
Oh, we've got people
So
interested in
let's
the
see.
asteroids. Good to keep in mind.
Oh, yes. That's actually what I've been curious about learning next, the asteroids. Yeah, I'm here for all of it, guys. I mean, I'll just sit here on the couch and be like, and go. and and ask questions along the way. But it really is helpful. And for me, and this is just my take on it, it helps me to know my mission. After talking
Mm,
with Karina and getting that super in-depth reading last time, it really firmed up for me and it gave me a very clear picture of, okay, I'm doing this. This is what I'm doing. And now it's figuring out how to get integrated and
mm,
what to do. So I
mm.
think that's great. Well, you guys, this has been amazing. This is the longest stream I think we've
I
had, but
know.
it's
I did
also
not know
been,
how
but
long this
it's
was going
good.
to take.
No, no, no. It's awesome. So much. And so I'm going to go back, put the timestamps down. And guys, if you enjoyed this, please make sure to hit that like button. Leave a comment when we're done, because what it does is it pushes this information out to other people who needs it. And if you guys, if anybody's ever like, I don't get this whole astrology thing, be like, look, here's the link. I got a show. um, So yeah, I've been drawn to Persephone since learning her
Yeah,
story
you
in
and I
high
talked
school.
about Persephone in your last reading.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Well, and I told, and Karina didn't know this. I'll share this one last thing, and then I promise I'll shut up. My very first ever electric guitar was red, and you always name your guitars. I named her Persephone. She was named Persephone. She's actually hanging on my uncle's wall in his guitar room right now. But yeah, it was Persephone, and that was her name. So, all right. Well, you guys, thank you so much for sticking around. It was amazing. You guys, I will see you tomorrow morning around 9:30-ish. We know how it goes. Yeah, you're troublemakers. And I will see you guys then. So in the meantime, go conquer your world as only you can. We will be here to help you light the way. You guys take care. We'll see you tomorrow.
Well,